Likutey Halakhot on Shulchan Aruch Yoreh Day'ah. Rebbe Noson, follower of Rebbe Nachman of Breslov. Laws of Shaving. Law 1. The prohibition of shaving the side locks or the beard, based upon what is written in the lesson in Likutey Halakhot, Part 1, 30, that hairs correspond to lower wisdom, which is the most important perception, corresponding to Malkut, to which life must be channeled, corresponding to Malkut Zohar, Part 3. 41a. In contrast to forgetfulness, which is the realm of death, the Malkut must also be sundered from the four kingdoms that are the realm of evil, so that they will not draw nourishment from the wisdom that corresponds to Malkut, which corresponds to a Dalet. This is accomplished through loving kindness, corresponding to Abraham, and which is manifested through rebuke. Study there. The side locks and the beard correspond to the light of the countenance, the glory of the face, corresponding to the perception of wisdom, as written, "You shall glorify the face of an elder," Leviticus 19:32. For a beard is the glory of the face, the light of the countenance, which corresponds to wisdom, as written, "A person's wisdom makes his face shine." Ecclesiastes 8:1. For the beard corresponds to the 13 principles upon which the Torah can be interpreted. Likutey Halakhot, Part 1, 20 and 27, and they are the main tools through which wisdom is attained. That is why the beard and the side locks are hairs, for they correspond to the perception of wisdom, for the perception corresponds to hairs, which are the lower wisdom, as explained there. Thus, the 13 principles that correspond to the beard are measures and constrictions for the upper wisdom, as stated in the lesson, as hairs, the letters of the Torah, which correspond to principles and measures. That is why it is forbidden to use a razor on the hairs of the beard or the side locks, for they embody life and length of days, which correspond to an elder, and it would be improper that something that shortens life will cut down that which lengthens it, as our sages said regarding the altar Medot 3:4. Thus, it is forbidden to cut or otherwise destroy these hairs, for on the contrary, they are the sight of the ascent of lower wisdom, for they are the light of the countenance. This corresponds to the two side locks and the beard, paralleling the three festivals that are the light of the countenance. The two side locks correspond to right and left, and the beard is in the middle, which correspond to the three festivals that parallel the three forefathers who represent the right, the left, and the middle. The ultimate light of the countenance is the beard, which is the ultimate perception of wisdom, but through the two side locks that correspond to right and left, which correspond to loving kindness, and rebuke for loving kindness is the right, and rebuke corresponds to harshness, which corresponds to the left, we attain the beard, which is the light of the countenance. All other hairs on the head, though they too correspond to the waste product of the mind, are a source of nourishment for the realm of evil, in fact, the main source, because they are waste product, which is why, when they grow too long, they must be cut, as in, he cut him into four, so as not to give the forces of evil nourishment from the lower wisdom, which corresponds to a Dalet. That is why it is a great mitzvah to have a haircut on the eve of a festival in order to sunder the Malkut from the four kingdoms, so that it will be able to ascend during the three festivals, which are the light of the countenance, as said. Law 2. Based on the lesson in Likutey Halakhot, Part 2, 4, study there well. We must form a vessel and channel in which to receive the loving kindness which is accomplished through fear and awe, which in turn is attained through desire, and desire is attained through binding to the root of desire, which corresponds to the forehead of desire. But countering this is the forehead of the serpent, which is the very opposite of desire, and its nourishment is from the elders of the generation who lack wholeness, who do not increase holiness and intelligence throughout their lifetimes as they grow older. Study in the lesson. Charity is beneficial for this. This corresponds to short of days filled with anger. Job 14:1. From the blemish of the elders, which corresponds to short of days, the forehead of the serpent, which corresponds to anger, draws nourishment, countering desire. But through an elder of holiness, we attain desire, as in an elder with an uplifted face, Isaiah 9:14 face, corresponding to desire. Study all this there well. Section 1. The Torah thus warns us not to damage the hairs of the beard, the main prohibition being specifically with a razor. This is because the hairs of the beard literally correspond to the days of elderliness, for the hairs of the beard are very sublime and exalted, lights that have been constricted into hairs which correspond to channels and constrictions. This corresponds to days, for days correspond to constrictions and measures. Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 56, which is why, with every day of one's life, one must add holiness and intelligence so that one will be able to channel and shine the light of intelligence into that day, which literally corresponds to hairs. That is why we must not blemish or damage the side locks of the beard, so as not to blemish the beard, so as not to nourish the forehead of the serpent that is nourished from the fall of the days of elderliness, which is literally the damaging and falling of the hairs of the beard. For the hairs of the beard correspond to the days of elderliness. Essentially, the prohibition is with a razor, which corresponds to a sword, which corresponds to shortness of days. For a sword was created to shorten human life, so it is improper that it should be raised over that which lengthens it, which is the holy beard, which corresponds to length of days, as said. A razor and sword corresponds to Esau, who was blessed in this, as written, "You shall live by your sword." Genesis 27:40, which shortens human life. For the ultimate shortening of human life is when one does not add holiness and intelligence on every day of one's life. That is caused by Esau, who is the embodiment of evil that entices a human being away from the paths of life and thereby shortens their days, which is why Esau was blessed with the sword, which shortens human life. As our sages said, Tanchuma, Yitro 17, and Esau's shortening human life by obstructing and enticing the human being from adding holiness during their lifetime is itself the source of Esau's nourishment. This is because he corresponds to the forehead of the serpent, which corresponds to anger, the opposite of desire, and to harsh judgment, for he corresponds to his descendant, Amalek, who corresponds to the forehead of the serpent, the root of natural sciences, the potency of heresy, for denials and heresies correspond to Amalek, as the Rebbe cites Likutey Moharan, Part 2, 19. Hence, Esau Amalek corresponds to short of days, filled with anger, for he corresponds to a sword, to the sword of the embodiment of evil, which shortens life materially and spiritually, from which itself Esau Amalek is nourished, for he corresponds to anger, to the forehead of the serpent, the root of natural sciences, the opposite of the forehead of desire. This is why the main prohibition of damaging the beard is with a razor, which corresponds to a sword, for it is improper for that which shortens life to be raised over that which lengthens it. For the essence of the prohibition of damaging the beard is so as not to give nourishment to the forehead of the serpent, on account of the blemish of the fallen days of the elder, which corresponds to the damaging of the hairs of the beard. Thus, the main prohibition is with a razor and sword, for this causes very great damage, for one thereby damages the holy beard with a razor and sword, and gives nourishment to the razor and sword that corresponds to Esau, to the forehead of the serpent, from the falling of the hairs of the beard. That is why the main prohibition is with a razor, for that is the essential blemish. We must not give nourishment to the razor and sword that corresponds to anger, to the forehead of the serpent from the falling of the hairs of the beard. Section 2. With this is explained and made evident to the intelligent eye why philosophy and heresy are so rampant in Germany and similar places. Due to our many sins, they became trapped in the nets of the forces of evil and became accustomed to this very great sin of damaging the hairs of the beard. And in fact, the Holy Literature states that even damaging the beard with other permissible methods is also an extremely great and awesome blemish, for all the hairs of the beard are very sublime, exalted, and awesome channels. It is beyond anyone's ability to imagine and grasp in their mind the immeasurable great holiness of the holy beard, or, inversely, to imagine the punishment of one who damages and lifts a hand to damage such an exalted holiness. Zohar, Part 3, 130b, Likutey Torah, Ari, Kedoshim. But due to our many sins, over time, many people breach the barrier and are transgressing 5 prohibitions brazenly, literally destroying the beard with a razor. Woe to their souls, for they have done themselves evil. This is what has caused the rise of natural sciences. For the forehead of the serpent, which is the root of natural sciences, draws nourishment from the fall of the beard. Understand this. Section 3. This corresponds to the prohibition of rounding the side locks, which are adjacent to the forehead. The side locks, pah in singular, correspond to fear and awe, for pah is numerically equivalent to Elohim, which corresponds to fear and awe, as written, Fear Elohim, Ecclesiastes 12:13, and fear and awe is attained through desire, as said, so we leave the side locks that are adjacent to the forehead. For from the forehead of desire, which is the root of desire, comes fear and awe, which corresponds to the side locks, as said. However, so as not to empower the forehead of the serpent, that is the root of natural sciences, which cause blemish and denial even in the root of desire. In the forehead of desire, we must therefore leave the hairs of the beard and not damage them, so as not to empower the forehead of the serpent. Rather, through the holy beard comes an illumination of desire. For the forehead of the serpent has been subdued, and the forehead of desire, the root of desire, has been empowered. And then we attain fear and awe, which is the side locks adjacent to the forehead. This is the prohibition of shaving the side locks and the beard, which are essentially one, for they are interdependent, as said. That is why Jewishness is entirely dependent upon this. The ultimate goal of the Jewish people and the essence of our service is to attain foreigners will rise up and shepherd your flocks. Isaiah 61:5, meaning that we will have no need to involve ourselves in any mundane affair, but devote our entire days to the service of God, which would be impossible unless God's bounty of loving kindness is showered upon us, as in, you shall be called God's priests there, verse 6. But loving kindness can only be received through fear and awe, through the forehead of desire. Study there well in the lesson. That is why the essence of Jewishness is dependent upon the side locks and the beard, for through the beard is manifested desire, as in an elder with an uplifted face, as said, and then we attain fear and awe, which corresponds to the side locks. And when we attain fear and awe, a bounty of loving kindness automatically flows. This is because loving kindness actually flows constantly, only that we need a vessel, a channel, in which to receive it, as explained in the lesson. Hence, through the beard and side locks we attain fear and awe, and then we are able to receive a bounty of loving kindness, after which we have no need to involve ourselves in any endeavors for sustenance, for the world is then maintained through God's loving kindness, and we are then able to devote our entire days to the service of God. Reaching this is the yearning of the Jewish people, which is why Jewishness is dependent upon the beard and side locks. Study the entire lesson there in Likutey Moharan, Part 2:4. Law 3. Do not round the corners of your heads, and do not shave off the corners of your beards. Leviticus 19:27, based on the lesson in Likutey Halakhot, Part 1, 30. Study there the entire lesson, from beginning to end. Section 1. This corresponds to the prohibition of shaving off the side locks and the beard, which are the hairs adjacent to the face. The Malchut, the lower wisdom, spoken of in the lesson, corresponds to the letters of the Torah, to the measures and forms of the letters of the Torah. As explained there well how through these hairs, which correspond to constrictions, we are able to perceive perceptions of God. That is why it is forbidden to remove the hairs of the beard and the side locks, which are the hairs most adjacent to the light of the countenance, for the vitality of the Malchut, which corresponds to the lower wisdom, comes from the light of the countenance that shines into the three festivals, as stated in the lesson. Thus, through these hairs that are adjacent to the light of the countenance, which are the side locks and the beard, the wisdom and constriction of the perception of godliness can be drawn. For the vitality of the Malchut, the lower wisdom, which corresponds to hairs, is the light of the countenance. This corresponds to the beard and the two side locks, paralleling the three festivals in which the light of the countenance shines. Section 2. That is why Jewish faith and Jewishness in general is dependent upon the beard and the side locks, why they give evidence that a Jewish person is from the seed blessed by God, from Jewish seed, and why whoever has been led astray by a foreign spirit and seeks to deny the God of Israel begins, first thing, by removing the beard and side locks. Indeed, the entire holy Jewish faith is dependent upon the beard and side locks, for our entire holy Torah and all the commandments are constrictions for the perception of godliness, as explained in the lesson. Every single letter and every single word of our holy Torah, written and oral, and every single commandment and every custom of the upright, holy, and chosen Jewish people are all measures and constrictions through which they are able to attain a perception of godliness, each one to the extent of their ability to sense it in their heart, according to each one's service and toil in Torah, commandments, and good deeds, as well as refraining from bad deeds. All of these constrictions and measures, corresponding to the measures of the letters of the Torah, correspond to hairs, as said, all coming from the hairs of the supernal beard and side locks. Ate, for every single hair of the holy side locks and beard are all supernal channels and holy constrictions through which are channeled all wisdom of the holy Torah and commandments, through which we are able to perceive godliness. This is because the 13 rectifications of the holy beard parallel the 13 principles upon which the Torah can be interpreted, which are the totality of the holy Torah. And woe to whoever intentionally and deliberately damages a single hair of the holy beard and side locks. Woe to them, and woe to their soul, for they have uprooted themselves and their souls from the God of Israel, and have no portion in Moses' Torah. Woe to their souls, for they have done themselves great harm. But on account of this, due to our many sins, heretical philosophies have become very widespread in Germany and its environs, where people have completely cast off the yoke of heaven and have removed their beards and most of their side locks and wear Gentile clothing. For as explained in the lesson, sometimes the Malchut, the lower wisdom, falls amidst the four kingdoms, which corresponds to the cry of a ruler among the fools. Ecclesiastes 9:17. The Malchut, crying out bitterly over its wisdom, having fallen among the fools. For the fool seeks to be wise, to become powerful through the foreign wisdoms, which are the heretical philosophies, which are truly foolishness, through the lower wisdom corresponding to the Malchut, having fallen into exile. Thus, by their removing their beards in Germany, through which they blemish in the constrictions of the perception of godliness, in the lower wisdom, in the Malchut, through that the foreign wisdoms, which are the philosophies, become stronger. That is why they study there these foreign wisdoms so much, because they have deliberately removed their beards, transgressing 5 negative commandments every time they do so. For foreign wisdoms increase through the removal of the holy beard, for they are interdependent, as said. In fact, not only are they transgressing 5 negative commandments, but each time they remove their beards, they are in effect transgressing the entire Torah, for the entire Torah is dependent upon it, as said. This is because the razor and sword that they raise upon the holy beard empowers the kingdom of Amalek, which is the totality of the 4 kingdoms, as stated in the lesson. For Amalek is a descendant of the wicked Esau, who is nourished by, "You shall live by, your sword." Genesis 27:40, which is mainly when the lower wisdom, the Malkut, which corresponds to a sword that avenges the vengeance of the covenant, Leviticus 26:25, is blemished, as explained in the lesson. This is because the ascent and rectification of the Malkut comes through the rectification of the holy sword, through which the Malkut, which corresponds to a Dalit, is sundered from the 4 kingdoms, as in, "He cut away the 4, thereby subduing the sword of Esau, the kingdom of Amalek," which corresponds to, "You shall live by your sword." So, when we raise a razor or knife, which corresponds to a sword, on the holy beard, one blemishes very greatly in the holy Malkut, which corresponds to a sword that avenges the vengeance of the covenant, which is nourished from the light of the countenance, from the hairs of the beard and the sidelocks, as said, thus empowering the sword of Esau, corresponding to the kingdom of Amalek, which is the totality of the 4 kingdoms. All this because these people had first blemished in the covenant, for certainly no one would raise a hand to damage one's beard, unless one had already blemished very much in the holy covenant, on account of which one blemished in the mind, in the lower wisdom, on account of which evil thoughts, foreign wisdoms, befell the mind, such that eventually an evil spirit enticed the individual to remove their beard, through which one completely uprooted oneself from the holy Malkut, from the lower wisdom, from the perception and faith of the Jewish people. One then has no portion in the God of Israel, in his holy Torah, or in his holy Jewish people. Section 3. The loving kindness through which we sunder the Malkut from the 4 kingdoms comes through rebuke, through which loving kindness is manifested, and this rebuke is commensurate with each individual's Torah and prayer, commensurate with each individual's holy audacity, as explained well in the lesson. All this is embodied in the holy beard, for the hairs of the beard are thick in order to subdue judgments. Zohar, Part 3, 140a, which corresponds to holy audacity, in the sense of audacity as firm and harsh, through which Torah and prayer, which are embodied in the holy beard, are attained. This is because the totality of the novel Torah insights is the 13 principles upon which the Torah can be interpreted, which come from the 13 rectifications of the beard, and prayer is contained in the 13 attributes of compassion, as our sages said of when God wrapped himself in a talit and taught Moses the proper order of prayer, then revealing to him the 13 attributes of compassion. Rosh Hashanah 17b. For the essence of prayer is compassion and supplication, to arouse the 13 attributes of God's compassion that are contained in the 13 rectifications of the beard Zohar, Part 3, 131a. Through this, through Torah and prayer, commensurate with each individual's audacity, through that is the elder at the head of the academy, able to know how to rebuke each individual and how to open his mouth wisely, as in, "She opened her mouth with wisdom," Proverbs 31:26. That is because all the rectifications of the beard surround the holy mouth, and the manifestation of the channels of the holy wisdom of the holy beard, corresponding to the elder, manifested only at the head of the academy, Yoma 28b, manifested only through the holy mouth, through which all wisdom that comes through the channels of the hairs of the sidelocks and beard is manifested. Through the manifestation of this wisdom of rebuke, loving kindness is evoked, through which the Malkut is elevated from exile among the 4 kingdoms, elevating it to the light of the countenance that shines in the 3 festivals, which corresponds to the Malkut ascending up to the holy beard, which is the light of the countenance. This is because the perception of godliness, which is the manifestation of God's kingship, comes through many constrictions, and each and every constriction corresponds to the Malkut of the higher world and level. For the lower wisdom that corresponds to the Malkut of the world of Atzilut and emanation is much higher and exalted above the higher wisdom of the world of Bria and creation. So when we must elevate the Malkut, the lower wisdom, from exile, we must arouse and evoke an illumination from the root of the Malkut, which is from the Malkut, the lower wisdom, that is, at the root of the higher worlds. With this, you can understand a tiny bit of the illusions in the lesson. The ascent of the Malkut, corresponding to a Dalet, is through prayer, which is the root of the Malkut, corresponding to the kingship of the Messiah, which is the root of the Malchut, as explained elsewhere, Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 54, which is why the rectification of the ascent of the Malchut comes through the holy beard, which corresponds to the light of the countenance. For the holy beard itself comes from the constrictions from the Malchut that is in much higher and exalted worlds, as explained in the Etz Chaim 13:11. For the lights of the beard come from the two side locks, which correspond to Elohim, which is numerically equivalent to Peh, corresponding to the Malkut, as explained there. Understand this well. Section 4. The three festivals are thus dependent upon the sages of the generation, who are the elders of the generation. As our sages said, "You shall call them yourselves, even if mistaken, Torah Kohanim." This is because the ascent of the Malchut on the festivals to the light of the countenance is dependent specifically upon the elders, for the elder corresponds to the light of the countenance, as said, "Since the elders and sages know how to assure that the month of spring will come at the right time, so they add an extra month and set the time of the months upon which all the festivals are dependent. There are 12 months, but in totality they are 13, which corresponds to the secret of the intercalation, which is the 13th month, and these 13 new moons are the rectification of the Malkut, which corresponds to the moon, since the months are reckoned by the moon, and they come from the 13 rectifications of the beard. Since the ultimate ascent of the Malchut is brought about through the 13 rectifications of the beard, which are the light of the countenance that shines in the three festivals. Thus, the sanctification of the month is the first mitzvah which the Israelites were instructed, since the sanctification of the month corresponds to the Malchut, to the lower wisdom, to the constrictions of the perception of godliness, upon which the entire Torah is dependent. Section 5. This corresponds to the 4 Torah sections that we read leading up to Pesach, which is the first of the 3 festivals, when the manifestation of godliness to the Israelites began through the exodus from Egypt and the splitting of the Red Sea. The 4 sections correspond to the Malkut, which corresponds to a Dalet, which must be sundered from the exile in the 4 kingdoms, which are called exile in Egypt, as the Rebbe cites from the Midrash. That all the exiles are called after the exile in Egypt, because they all correspond to distress of the Jewish people. Genesis, Rabbah, 16:4. Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 4. This corresponds to the section of the shekels, which is read first, which corresponds to charity, to loving kindness, through which we cut and sunder the Malkut from the 4 kingdoms, as in, "Sow charity for yourselves, and cut with loving kindness." Hosea 10:12 cited in the lesson. The section of Zachor corresponds to the subdual of Amalek, which is the all-encompassing and head of all the 4 kingdoms, for it is comprised of them all. The section of the heifer is to purify the Jewish people from defilement to death. When we elevate the Malchut, which corresponds to the congregation of Israel, from the wicked kingdom of Haman Amalek, we must then purify it from the filth of the serpent, which is the realm of death, which corresponds to the kingdom of Haman Amalek. So, we need the ashes of the heifer to be purified from this, and the red heifer corresponds to the rebuke of the rebuker, through which he purified the Jewish people from their sins, which is why the heifer is red, which corresponds to judgment, to rebuke. That is why the heifer purifies the defiled, and defiles the pure who were involved with it, which corresponds to the rebuke of the authentic rebukers of the generation, through which they purify the defiled from their sins and bring them back in complete repentance. But all those involved in rebuke are thereby defiled, for some blemish of the sins of those with whom they are involved becomes attached to them, which corresponds to the red heifer that purifies the defiled and defiles the pure. However, the reward of the rebuker is greater than his loss, for afterward he easily purifies himself through only immersion and sunset, whereas he had purified those who were completely defiled, with the defilement of death, the filth of the serpent, and through his rebuke he brought them to complete repentance and purified them. That is why the heifer is called after Moses Rashi on Numbers 19:2, and all subsequent heifers had to be sanctified with ashes of Moses's heifer Numbers Rabbah 19:6. For Moses was the head of all authentic rebukers, since he was very involved in this and constantly surrendered his life for the Jewish people by rebuking them and bringing them back to the good. And though on account of this a great blemish, by his elevated standard, was caused to his soul, as written, "Go down," Exodus 32:7, nevertheless, he did not abandon his position and continued to surrender his life for the people's sake all his days, rebuking them and bringing them back to the good. That is why all subsequent heifers had to receive from Moses' heifer from his good rebuke. This corresponds to the procedure of the red heifer having to be done by the deputy high priest Rashi on Numbers 19:3. The high priest corresponds to the teacher of the generation, as written, "The lips of a priest will guard intelligence, and they will seek Torah from his mouth." Malachi 2:7. If the teacher resembles an angel of God. Moed Katan 17a. And it is impossible to receive from the great wisdom of the teacher of the generation, who corresponds to a high priest, other than through his holy followers, which corresponds to an interpreter, as was customary in ancient generations, to have an interpreter explain the teacher's lecture, for it is impossible to receive directly the wisdom of the authentic sage and teacher of the generation other than through an interpreter, who corresponds to the followers who uncover and explain his wisdom and rebuke to the masses. This is because the authentic teacher himself, other than through his followers, as the Rebbe writes elsewhere in Likutey Halakhot, Part 1, 140, study there. This corresponds to the preparations of the red heifer, which corresponds to the rebuke of the authentic sage to purify the Jewish people of their sins, being done specifically by the deputy high priest, who corresponds to an interpreter, to the followers of the authentic sage, who corresponds to a high priest. Finally, the section of the month is the culmination of the ascent of the Malkut, which corresponds to the new moon, as said, "For through the new moons are fixed the times of all the festivals, when the Malchut ascends." Section 6. All of these 4 sections, through which we sunder the Malkut from the 4 kingdoms, after which it ascends to the light of the countenance on the 3 festivals, correspond to the 4 sons, as explained in the lesson, paragraph 6. The section of shekels, which corresponds to charity for the poor, corresponds to Isaac, who is the wise son. For the poor one is from the realm of harsh judgment, from Isaac, and through the charity that we give him, we revive him and restore to him his face and wisdom that had departed from him, on account of the distress of his poverty, as in, the wisdom of the needy one is scorned. Ecclesiastes 9:16. That is why through charity we attain the light of the countenance, as written, "I will behold your countenance with charity." Psalm 17. The 15, and the light of the countenance corresponds to wisdom, as in, a person's wisdom makes their face shine. There, 8:1. That is why Isaac, who corresponds to charity, which is the light of the countenance, corresponding to life, to wisdom, which is the amelioration of harshness of Isaac, from which poverty devolves. The section of Zachor is the subdual of Amalek, who was descendant from the wicked Esau, which corresponds to the wicked son, who is Esau, as stated in the lesson. The section of the heifer, which corresponds to rebuke, through which we attain repentance, as said, corresponds to the son who knows not how to ask a question, which corresponds to Ishmael, who repented. The section of the month, when the Malchut begins to ascend to the light of the countenance, for it is then that the illumination of Pesach, which is the first of the festivals, begins, which is why we recite all the laws of Pesach on this Shabbat, corresponds to the simple son, who is Jacob. The simple one, for Jacob, corresponds to the light of the countenance, as in, those who seek your countenance, Jacob. Psalms 24:6, as the Rebbe writes in several places, such as Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 23 and 27. Section 7. This corresponds to the bed, the table, the chair, and the candelabra, which are the four rectifications of the Shekhinah Zohar, Part 2, 133a, which correspond to the above four. The candelabra corresponds to the wise son, for the candelabra corresponds to the head, Tikkunei Zohar, 13b, which corresponds to oil on your head will not be lacking. Ecclesiastes 9:8, corresponding to the holy anointing oil, which is the embodiment of intelligence. The chair corresponds to the complete throne, which corresponds to the eradication of Haman Amalek, who was a descendant of Esau, who is the wicked son. For the throne will not be complete until any commemoration of Amalek will be eradicated. Tanchuma Taitsei 11. The table corresponds to the atoning power of repentance, which corresponds to the son who knows not how to ask a question. For the table atones as the altar brachot, 55a. The bed corresponds to the simple son, who corresponds to Jacob, whose bed was complete with the 12 tribes of God, who comprise the four camps that parallel the four camps of the Shekhinah Zohar. Part 3, 118b, which correspond to a dalet. This is because Jacob is comprised of them all, and he elevates the Malchut, which corresponds to a dalet, to a God-fearing woman, to the light of the countenance, as in, who seek your countenance, Jacob, as said. That is why Jacob married 4 women, from whom came forth the 4 camps that correspond to a dalet, and why on Pesach we all recline on a bed, for the bed is comprised of the 4 camps of the Shekhinah that correspond to the 4 camps of the tribes, which correspond to a dalet. Section 8. This corresponds to Pesach, the prohibition of leavened food, and the eating of matzah. On Pesach, Moses took the Israelites out of Egypt and revealed to them a perception of godliness, which is why Pesach is the first of the festivals, since Pesach corresponds to loving kindness. To Abraham Zohar, Part 3, 282b, and the ultimate rectification of the Malchut. The lower wisdom, which is to sunder it from the 4 kingdoms and elevate it to the light of the countenance that shines in the 3 festivals, comes through loving kindness. So since Pesach is the beginning of the manifestation of godliness with an enormously great light, therefore, leavened food is forbidden in the minutest amount. For there is only a minute difference between leavened food and matzah, the open space between the left leg of the letter nun and its roof, which is what differentiates between a nun, between leavened food and matzah. This is because the perception of godliness cannot be attained other than through many constrictions from higher wisdom to lower wisdom, for no thought can grasp him at all. That is why the most important thing is faith, which corresponds to lower wisdom, to Malchut, and all perceptions and all constrictions correspond to faith, which is the foundation of the entire Torah. As written, a righteous one lives by his faith, Habakkuk 2:4, and all your commandments are faith, Psalms 119:86. This is because simple people can surely not attain a perception of godliness, and their only hope to attain the eternal purpose, the authentic purpose, is through faith. But even the one with great intelligence, a sharp mind, a great Torah scholar, well-versed in Talmud and Jewish law, and even with knowledge of Kabbalistic wisdom, in the Holy Zohar and the writings of the Ari, as long as he has not refined himself from the filth of the serpent and has not yet completely broken the lust of the body and its materiality, and still possesses even a tiny bit of bodily lust and the foolishness of this world, his intelligence is still not complete, and he must not enter into the wisdom of the perception of God at all, for he can stumble greatly and fall. One must therefore strengthen oneself only in faith and totally cast aside one's intelligence, relying on our holy ancestors and on the authentic tzaddikim who subdued their inclinations and completely broke their materiality, for only they attained a perception of godliness with utmost wholeness. But even tzaddikim, as these who completely purified and sanctified themselves from the filth of the serpent and broke all their lusts, completely subjugating the body and materiality, they too strengthened themselves only with holy faith, as can be understood in many places from the Rebbe's words. For it is impossible to perceive any perception or to have any knowing of the shining of godliness other than through the holy faith, which is the gate through which we enter into all holinesses, all perceptions, and all holy knowledge, as in, with Zot Aaron shall enter into the holy. Leviticus 16. One Zot corresponds to Malchut, to faith, which is the foundation of the entire Torah, in the Korah. As in, all your commandments are faith, and Zot is the Torah, the testimonies, the statutes, and the laws. Deuteronomy 6, 1 specifically, Zot, faith. This is why the Tikkuni Zohar explains at length that no prophet or seer may ascend to holiness without it. Number 6, page 11b. For it is impossible to approach and enter any holiness, any perception, any knowledge of God, other than through the holy faith. All the battles and tests that a person has in the service of God are impossible to win and withstand other than through the holy faith. As stated there in the Tikkunim, when David went out to battle, he relied only on faith. As written, if a camp encamps against me, if a battle arises against me, in Zot I trust. Psalms 27, 3, meaning that his entire trust and hope was in faith, which is called Zot. In other words, David knew that he was strong in faith in God, so he was therefore sure that he would withstand all the camps and battles of the inclination for evil and the realm of evil, for he would certainly vanquish and break them, since he has strong faith in God, which is called Zot, as in Zot I trust, specifically Zot, which is faith, as said. And when the prophet Jeremiah saw the lengthiness of the exile, he felt there was no hope of ever leaving it other than through faith, as written, Zot I restore to my heart. Therefore I hope. Lamentations 3:21. As explained there in the Tikkunim, the prophet foresaw that at the end of the exile, preceding the Messiah, the forces of evil will become very powerful, and it will be difficult for anyone to overcome them, which is why he said that there was no hope to leave the exile, other than through Zot, which is the holy faith, that whoever remains strong in faith will surely be victorious in the battle, and will surely leave the exile. Study there in the Tikkunim, which elaborates about Zot, how Jacob transmitted it to his sons, Moses to the Israelites, and so forth. In sum, Zot, spoken about there in the Tikkunim, corresponds to the holy faith, which is the essence and foundation of the entire Torah. And only through it are we able to enter into the gates of holiness and to win all the battles that a person has in the service of God. Section 9. This corresponds to the high priest admonishing the people before they went out to battle. Shema Yisrael, hear Israelites, today you are approaching battle against your enemies. Let your hearts not falter. Deuteronomy 23, upon which our sages comment, even if you have no merit other than your reciting every day the Shema Yisrael, you deserve to vanquish your enemies. Sota 42a. This is as said. All battles in this world allude mainly to the battle against the inclination for evil, where, for even those battles that one has in the material world against enemies are all battles against the inclination for evil. As our sages said, that when one has enemies below, they also have enemies on high. So the essence of the battle is the battle against the inclination for evil. That is why the priest admonished the people before they went out to wage God's battle to vanquish the enemies and the realm of evil that surrounds holiness, surrounds the land of Israel, which are the totality of all enemies and obstructions to holiness, that when one goes out to battle with them, one is in great danger. For many accusations are then aroused that seek to completely cast the person down from the service of God. Thus, the most important thing in battle is to strengthen oneself, to stand firm on one's feet, and never fall from God's service. For then one will certainly be able to vanquish and break and annihilate them. And how does one strengthen one's trust so that one does not fall from God's service? The answer is only through the holy faith, that when one is strong in the holy faith, one certainly has nothing to fear from any battle or any test in the world. This is, hear Israelites, today you are approaching battle entirely in merit of Shema Yisrael, which is in the merit and power of the holy faith. In merit of that alone, you are able to approach physical and spiritual battle. For since you are firm in faith in God, you no longer have to fear any battle in the world. This is, let your hearts not falter, do not fear, do not flee, and do not be broken by them. Do not fear from the stampeding of the horses, from the hordes of the soldiers, and from the blasting of the horns. Sota 42a. These refer to the methods of battle used by the enemies to intimidate and threaten their foes, and all of these exist in the battle with the inclination for evil, as known to anyone who begins to enter a bit into the service of God, and in the battle with the inclination for evil, even a completely simple person. The way of the forces of evil is to threaten and intimidate a person very greatly, to make the service of God feel like a very great burden, on account of which many even refrain from beginning to enter God's service because of these threats and heaviness. This corresponds to the stampeding of the horses, the hordes of the soldiers, and the blasting of the horns. But the most important thing in the service of God is that the individual should not fear at all. As the Rebbe writes, that in this world, a person must pass over a very narrow bridge, and the most important thing is never to fear. Likutey Moharan, Part 248. The main source of inner strength to pass over this narrow bridge safely is the holy faith, which corresponds to Shema Yisrael. Today you are approaching battle, which is in merit of the Shema, which is faith, as said. Then let your hearts not falter, do not fear, do not flee, and do not be broken by them, for your God goes with you to save you. This is, God is with me, I shall not fear. Psalms 118:6. God is with me, in that I have full faith in God, that He is with me at all times, for the entire earth is filled with His glory. Therefore I shall not fear. What can a human being do to me? Since one has strong faith, one will surely win all battles, and ultimately will return to God, as in, Zot I restore to my heart, therefore I hope. Section 10. For the most important thing is faith, since faith is the beginning and opening and gate through which to enter into the service of God and the perception of godliness, as well as the ultimate culmination of all knowledge and perceptions, as in, the ultimate knowledge is to know that we know nothing, which is faith. That is the ultimate knowledge and perception, to know and realize that it is totally impossible to really know anything, so we must simply have faith in God. This corresponds to, I am the first, and I am the last, and besides me, there is no God. Isaiah 44:6. I corresponds to the Malkut, to faith. So, I am the first and I am the last means that the beginning is faith and the culmination is faith. And the more that we know of and perceive godliness, the more we must strengthen our faith, which is the ultimate culmination of all perception and knowledge. That is why we need a very great teacher who is able to imbue perceptions of godliness even into the most lowly ones. For all perceptions and knowledge are anyway always just beyond reach, for no thought at all can grasp him. Section 11. Indeed, with wisdom it is obviously impossible to have any perception or knowledge of God, for one can easily err greatly with one's wisdom, as the philosophers have erred, such that they ultimately reached complete heresy through the mistakes of their confused wisdom. That is why the most important thing is faith. However, we must enliven faith and strengthen it by drawing vitality from the light of the countenance, which is the intelligence, which is accomplished specifically through the extremely exalted tzaddikim of the generation. They are involved in imbuing us with the holy faith, and in all the Torah teachings and perceptions that they reveal to us, they thereby enliven and strengthen our holy faith. For though we see and understand that we have no understanding at all in their words, and see and from afar that their great wisdom is very hidden and distant from us, nevertheless, each individual, to the extent of their ability, is able to have a tiny glimpse of great and potent illusions of how much we must strengthen ourselves in faith, so that perhaps, one will also come to know and perceive a tiny bit, to behold the pleasantness of God and to visit His palace. The pleasantness and sweetness of one glimpse is impossible to imagine. It is worth bearing all suffering in the world, breaking all the lusts, toiling greatly in the service of God, with great labor and self-surrender, in order to experience one single glimpse of this pleasantness and sweetness. Fortunate is the one who truly pursues this. And that is why the very great authentic tzaddikim imbue us with the complete holy faith. Section 12. This corresponds to matzah. A very great light was manifested on Pesach, a light that is utterly impossible to perceive, especially before Torah giving, when we had no vessels with which to perceive it. For all vessels, measures, and constrictions are made only through the Holy Torah, the measures of the letters of the Torah. Thus, on Pesach, at the beginning of the manifestation of godliness, we must be very cautious, even from the minutest amount of leavened food. No leavening or leavened food should be found throughout all our boundaries. This is because leavened food corresponds to the leavening of the mind, which is philosophical wisdom and analyses, as in, my heart became leavened. Psalms 73:21, which King David said in reference to the philosophical wisdoms that rise to the human heart that lead one astray. Now, throughout the year, when the light is not that great, and we have already received the Torah, which is entirely measures and constrictions of perceptions of godliness, we are therefore able to eat leavened food without it harming us, for our faith is already strong through the Holy Torah, as in, all your commandments are faith. So, though we eat leavened food at this time, the mind does not become leavened at all by this. However, Pesach is the beginning of the manifestation of godliness. When a great light is manifested from on high without any arousal from below, for it was otherwise impossible to leave Egypt, since the people were very submerged in the filth of Egypt. It was therefore necessary that a very great light be manifested, as stated in the Kabbalistic intentions for Pesach in the Pre-Etz Chaim Chag Hamatzot, 1. A great light in which we have no grasp at all. Yet the soul is aroused with great arousal by the manifestation of this great light to the service of God with very fervent yearning, for though one does not consciously see it, one's soul sees it. That is why we had to leave Egypt in great haste, as in, they were chased out of Egypt and could not tarry, and neither had they prepared provisions for themselves. Exodus 12:39. This is relevant to every individual and at all times. For whenever any individual, in any time, is submerged in the lusts and emptiness of this world, this corresponds to being in the exile in Egypt. There are some who are very submerged in the filth of Egypt, in the filth of sins and iniquities, and because they are so very submerged in their abominations, it is therefore impossible to take them out of there with any rebuke or admonition, since they have already become so entwined in their foolishness and sins such that it is utterly impossible to take them out by talking to them in Torah and rebuke appropriate for their level. But God arranges so that no one will be banished from Him. So, in His compassion, He sends the person's heart from time to time a great spark, a great arousal, so that they will return to God, which corresponds to the proclamation from On High Toldot, Yaakov Yosef Tzav. One must then have compassion on one's soul, and as soon as an arousal for repentance comes upon a person, one must immediately hasten to flee for one's life and not look back, as in, hurry, flee for your life, do not look back behind you. Genesis 19:17, as in, lest you compare the ways of life. Proverbs 5:6. This is because one is so submerged in foolishness, confusion, and lusts that as soon as one begins to have a thought how, what, and in which way to flee from one's lusts, through which path one can reach repentance, one will surely return to one's folly, since one is so very, very submerged and confused. That is why, as soon as one has an arousal of repentance, one must immediately flee and not look back, no matter what, but have compassion on one's soul and quickly flee from what one must flee. This corresponds to Pesach, the time of the exodus from Egypt, when a great light from on high was manifested, and the Israelites immediately left with great haste, for they could not tarry, since, had they remained there for another moment, they would have remained submerged there forever. Halachic, Exodus. Furthermore, one should also not begin at this moment to think about sustenance, about how one will support oneself, but one must rather rely on God and cast one's lot upon Him, for God will provide for one's needs. This corresponds to, neither had they prepared provisions for themselves, for when one must flee from whatever one must flee, from a trap, one must not think about sustenance and provisions. If one were befallen by murderers and robbers or wild beasts, one would certainly flee as fast as one can and not think about how one will support oneself, and all the more when one must flee from the pit of hell and from eternal suffering to eternal life. One must flee quickly and escape for one's soul and not look back at all, for one cannot tarry for a moment to prepare provisions and sustenance for oneself, but trust in God and rely on Him, for He will not abandon anyone. This corresponds to matzah, which corresponds to the haste of Pesach. The beginning of the arousal, which corresponds to Pesach, is with great enthusiasm and arousal. One cannot be aroused to repentance unless one casts aside all of one's sophistry, as in a foolish and unwise people, Deuteronomy 32:6, as the Rebbe writes elsewhere in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 125. For if one were then to think about it with any wisdom, counsel, or strategy, whether of foreign wisdom or other worldly wisdom of financial concerns, no arousal in the world will ever help them. This is because the manifestation of godliness and the arousal that has come to the individual was only so that one would see a great light from afar, so that one would yearn to flee from one's lusts and foolishness and strengthen oneself in faith through the profusion of enormous light that one sees from afar. However, the essence of the light is impossible to receive, so one must then strengthen oneself greatly in faith and hasten to flee with all one's might from whatever one needs to flee with great haste. This corresponds to matzah being baked with great haste. Section 13. This is why matzah is called bread of poverty. Deuteronomy 16:3. At first thought, this seems strange, for in the writings of the Ari, we find that matzah is extremely great. Intelligence pri, etz, chaim, matzot, tu, f. So why is it then called bread of poverty, which is a lack of intelligence, since poverty is ultimately a lack of intelligence? Nedarim 41a. However, indeed, matzah contains both, and both are one and the same, on account of the enormous greatness of the light that is embodied in the matzah of Pesach, which corresponds to bread from heaven, for the cakes that the Israelites took out with them from Egypt tasted like manna kedushin. 38a, which is bread from heaven. Exodus 16:4, corresponding to an arousal from on high, and since this enormous light of Pesach corresponds to matzah, on account of which it is utterly impossible to perceive, and which only comes from on high, in order to strengthen and enliven the faith, for by seeing the great light from on high, even though it is utterly impossible to perceive, nevertheless, faith is thereby greatly strengthened, so the matzah is called bread of poverty, as poverty is ultimately a lack of intelligence. For specifically now, on account of the enormous light, we must completely put aside our intelligence and know that we know nothing at all, which corresponds to the constriction of lower wisdom, which is called needy. This is bread of affliction. It reminds us of the affliction that we were afflicted with in Egypt, and we also recite many things. The entire Haggadah in its presence, Pesachim 115b. The manifestation of intelligence and the illumination of Pesach, which corresponds to the beginning of repentance, was only for this, so that through it one will remind oneself of the affliction one's soul has suffered in the exile of one's lusts in Egypt, which is the realm of evil, through which one will recite many things before God, crying out loudly to Him until He has compassion and brings one close to His service. Section 14. This is the difference between leavened food and matzah. The difference is the open space in the letter nun. That is not in the letter nun. The entire difference between holiness and the realm of evil is only a hair's breadth, as in a whit between me and death. 1 Samuel 20:3. David referring here to himself. Zohar, Part 1, 88b. This is because the realm of evil draws its power from denials and blemishes in faith. For the inclination for evil is called a foreign god. Denials, Likutey Halakhot, Part 1. 10. And all denials come from wisdom, when one feels that one is wise and able to understand everything, and that all questions about God or about the authentic tzaddikim should be resolved for him. But on account of this wisdom, the person falls greatly. As the Rebbe writes in Likutey Halakhot, Part 2, 44, as written, "Your wisdom and your intelligence is your foolishness." Isaiah 47:10. That is why the most important thing is to completely cast aside one's intelligence and to rely only on faith. However, faith itself must be sustained by intelligence, as said earlier, and whoever is strong in the holy faith, the more knowledge and intelligence that they attain, the more that faith is strengthened for them, as in, the ultimate knowledge is to know that we know nothing. This corresponds to matzah, which is written with a letter nun, in which there is an open space between the dalet and the yud. The dalet corresponds to faith, to malchut, which is called poor, because it has nothing of its own, for it knows nothing, but only yearns for God with complete faith. But this faith must be nourished, and knowledge, which corresponds to a yud, must be brought into it, which corresponds to the yud that is inside the dalet, through which it becomes a hay. For a hay is a dalet that has become a hay Zohar, Part 2, 211:47a. Likutey Halakhot, Part 1, 49. The yud inside the dalet corresponds to Wisdom Zohar, Part 3, 10b, meaning that wisdom and intelligence have been introduced into faith in order to enliven it, But an open space must be left between the dalet, which corresponds to faith, and the yud, which corresponds to wisdom, to show that though one has already attained some wisdom and intelligence, which corresponds to the yud inside the hay, nevertheless, one still conducts oneself innocently as before, and still considers oneself poor and needy, for one knows and has faith that one still knows nothing. In fact, now one's faith is even stronger than before, through the knowledge that one attained, through which one now realizes how it is impossible to know God, and that one must strengthen one's faith even more. One therefore does not close the window of faith on account of the wisdom that one has attained, for that would correspond to leavened food, which is written with a letter chet, in which the passageway is sealed, which corresponds to the leavening of the mind, as in, my heart became leavened, meaning that on account of the wisdom and knowledge that one attained, one therefore feels that one has already become a complete sage, such that one relies entirely on one's wisdom and does not use faith at all, which corresponds to a chet, in which the opening of the dalet, which is the opening of faith, has already been sealed, since one assumes that one has already become wise. This leavens the heart with denials, completely distancing one from God. In sum, the essential difference between holiness and the realm of evil is just this minute amount. One who always remains firm in faith even after one has attained amazing and awesome wisdom. This is holiness. And then one will constantly continue to attain more perceptions and greater faith. But as soon as one feels that one has already become wise through whatever wisdom and knowledge one has attained and no longer uses faith, this is the realm of evil, corresponding to leavened food with a letter chet, in which the opening of faith has been sealed. Then one falls away completely from one's knowledge and becomes a complete idiot and fool. For the essence of wisdom is to know that wisdom is far from oneself, and to constantly strengthen oneself with greater faith, as in, I said I would become wise, but it is distant from me. Ecclesiastes 7:23. For the essence of wisdom is to realize that wisdom is distant from one, as the Rebbe writes elsewhere in Likutey Moharan, Part 2, 83. This corresponds to matzah ha, with a hey, where the dalet, corresponding to faith, is distanced from the yud, which corresponds to intelligence, as in, I said I would become wise, but it is distant from me. The yud always remains distant from the dalet, yet receives vitality from the wisdom that enters into it from afar, as in, from afar God appeared to me, Jeremiah 31:2, meaning that through the wisdom that one attains, one thereby strengthens one's faith even more. For the ultimate attainment of knowledge is to strengthen faith, which corresponds to the hay, to matzah, written with a hay. This corresponds to the broken matzah, to a pauper's bread, which is eaten in small pieces, Pesachim 115b. This is as said. Though matzah corresponds to extremely great intelligence, nevertheless, it is still called a pauper's bread, for the ultimate attainment of knowledge is to know that one is still a pauper in knowledge. Thus, the dalet always remains standing alone in the hay, even though a yud, which is intelligence, has been introduced into it. This corresponds to the broken matzah, which is broken into two pieces, corresponding to a hay that is a dalet and a yud. Pri Etz Chaim, Matzot, chapter 7. One part is set aside and hidden for the afikoman, and the second part is left in the open for the recitation of the Haggadah. This is as said. This alludes that we are still distant from knowledge, as in, I said I would become wise, but it is distant from me, which is why we do not want to use knowledge at all at this point, but only the part that is called bread of affliction, over which we recite the Haggadah, for we seek to strengthen ourselves only in faith, therefore crying out to God and yearning for Him. The larger portion that alludes to knowledge, though, we hide for the end of the Seder, for we must not use knowledge until the end, which alludes to the final end, when the earth will become filled with knowledge and when we will attain complete knowledge, as written, the earth will become filled with knowledge of God. Habakkuk 2:14, for the afikomen, which corresponds to knowledge, as in afikomen manna corresponds to the cakes that the Israelites took out of Egypt, in which they tasted the taste of manna, Kiddushin 38a, and manna represents knowledge, Likutey Halakhot, Part 1, 56. Section 15. On the first day of Pesach, there was a manifestation of a very great light from on high, after which this great light immediately departed and began to re-enter gradually and in proper sequence. This corresponds to the counting of the Omer, as explained in the Kabbalistic writings Pri-Etz Chaim, Sfirat Ha-Omer, Chapter 1. Pesach corresponds to loving kindness, through which we sunder the Malkut, the lower wisdom, from the exile of the four kingdoms. But this loving kindness must be received through rebuke, as the Rebbe writes in the lesson. So, at the incipience of the manifestation before Torah giving, how is rebuke possible? Because rebuke corresponds to judgments, and on account of the intensity of the exile, it would have been impossible for the loving kindness to be manifested through rebuke, so that the judgments would not become even more empowered. Thus, it was necessary then that the light of loving kindness would come from on high as an arousal from above, without any arousal from below. But when the light then departed, it had to be received gradually through rebuke, through which loving kindness is manifested. This corresponds to the Omer barley offering, which is identical to the meal offering brought for a suspected adulteress Zohar, Part 3, 97a, which corresponds to rebuke. To the husbands rebuking his wife out of jealousy, do not seclude yourself with that man, Sota, 2a. In the same way, the rebuke of the tzaddik to the Jewish people is that they not seclude themselves with that person. For all idolatrous thoughts, which are all denials that come to a person, correspond to adultery, as in, the adultering woman takes foreigners instead of her husband, Ezekiel 16:32, which refers to the sin of idolatry, to a blemish in faith. Thus, the rebuke is, do not seclude yourself with. For all of these types of thought are in the silence of secrecy, with no one knowing about them other than he who assesses hearts. As in, lest there be among you a man who will make a statue or an image and place it in secrecy. Deuteronomy 27:15, upon which our sages comment, in the secrecy of the world, Tikuni Zohar 6b. So the essence of the rebuke of the tzaddik to the people of Israel is regarding faith, which is the foundation of the entire Torah. Thus, do not seclude yourself with that person means that one should not allow the thoughts of denial of that person to enter into one's mind. That person being the personification of evil, one must not allow it to contaminate one's mind, but must banish from one's mind and heart all of such thoughts and confusions, and must not argue with them at all, but completely dispel them from one's mind, rendering oneself as an animal and relying only on faith. As written, I am a boor and know nothing. As animals am I with you. Psalms 73:22. This corresponds to the barley meal offering, which is the same as the meal offering for an adulteress, which are animal feed, as in, as animals am I with you. This is why rebuke is sometimes made in a humiliating way, which also corresponds to the meal offering for an adulteress, in that the rebuke comes through the barley, which is the humiliating food of animals, which corresponds to rebuke coming in a humiliating way. Through that is loving kindness channeled, through which we sunder the Malkut. This corresponds to the Omer counting, which corresponds to the constrictions of perceptions of godliness, which corresponds to the lower wisdom. Prior to 1, what can you count? Sefer Yetzirah, Chapter 1. So no counting is possible, so manifestation comes about through constrictions, which correspond to numbers, which correspond to counting. For in constrictions it is possible to count, such as the first constriction, the second constriction, and so on. This corresponds to the counting of the Omer, in which we count the days from the Omer. For days correspond to measures and constrictions, as in the measure of my days, Psalms 39:5. And these constrictions can only be manifested through the barley Omer offering, the meal offering of the adulteress, which corresponds to rebuke, for through that is loving kindness manifested, through which we sunder the Malkut from exile. This corresponds to the reaping and sundering of the Omer, as in reap according to loving kindness. For the Omer literally means a measure, corresponding to the lower wisdom, as in the Omer is a tenth of an Omer, Exodus 16:36, which refers to the Malkut Zohar, Part 3. 244a, which corresponds to measures and constrictions for the perception of godliness, which is barley, corresponding to the measures of the letters of the Torah. This corresponds to the raising of the Omer offering, in that we sunder the lower wisdom and elevate it to its root, to whom belong the four directions of the world, as well as up and down Menashot. 62a, in order to attain perception of godliness. Section 16. Thus, on the first day of the Omer counting, which is the day on which the reaping and sundering of the grain for the Omer was reaped, was the downfall of Haman Amalek. For at this time, the Malkut, the lower wisdom, was sundered from them, as in Samuel cut him into four, which refers to King Agag of Amalek, after which they are lifeless. So it is the time of the downfall of Haman Amalek, who is comprised of all the four kingdoms, as explained in the lesson regarding King Agag, paragraph 6. But other nations, enemies of the Jewish people, also had a great downfall on this night on which the grain for the Omer was reaped, such as Midian and Sennacherib, because they are all nourished by the lower wisdom that falls into exile under their domain, and through the reaping of the Omer is loving kindness manifested. The first night of the Omer counting is loving kindness, in loving kindness, through which we sunder and cut the Malkut from their dominion and elevate it to the light of the countenance. And then all nations that are comprised in the four kingdoms have their downfall. Section 17. That is why we count 7 weeks, 49 days, which are the totality of all constrictions, corresponding to the 49 facets of the Torah Yerushalmi Sanhedrin 4:2, and on the 50th day is Shavuot, which is Torah giving, which is the ultimate manifestation of godliness through constrictions. At this time, the Malkut ascends to the light of the countenance, which corresponds to the holy beard. For on Shavuot, God appeared as a compassionate elder, Mechilta, Yitro, Amen, and Amen. Related to earlier, paragraph 11, though we are totally unable to perceive the great light, nevertheless, through it is faith strengthened. For each individual, to the extent of their ability, clearly understands and perceives a yearning for faith in God. This cannot be explained, for each individual must experience it for themselves. But all wonders and all manifestations have always been solely in order to strengthen the holy faith. That is why even after Moses performed several miracles for the Israelites in Egypt and at the sea, including the 10 miracles done for our ancestors in Egypt and the 10 at the Sea of Ot 5:4, they're witnessing great signs and awesome marvels, as well Moses revealing to them great and awesome perceptions. Since after Moses asked God, when they ask, "What is his name? What shall I tell them?" Exodus 3:13, in response to which God revealed to him his holy names, Moses surely transmitted to the people great and awesome secrets in the perception of the mysteries of God's holy names, in which is comprised the entire Kabbalah, and even a maidservant beheld at the sea more than what the prophet Ezekiel beheld. Mechilta Bishalach, the Israelites, beheld even more, and the leaders and elders beheld even more than that Zohar, part 3, 22b. Yet, after all this, it is said, the Israelites beheld the great hand, and they had faith in God and in Moses his servant. Exodus 14:30. See, understand. and become wise, that after all the perceptions, knowledge, and miracles, they still needed faith. This is because all perceptions and miracles only come for the purpose of faith, each individual, to the extent of their ability to perceive, through which their faith is commensurately strengthened, as in, the Israelites beheld the great hand, and they had faith in God. For through the beholding and the great perception they had at that time, witnessing such awesome miracles in the material world, such as the splitting of the Red Sea, through that their faith was greatly enhanced. For we must constantly strengthen ourselves in faith to have faith in God and in the authentic tzaddikim, with simplicity, without any sophistry, for the most important thing is simple faith. Law 4. Regarding the great severity of the sin of shaving off the side locks, upon which the entire Jewish faith is dependent, as we see that the main distinguishing sign between the Jewish people and the Gentiles is the side locks and the beard, and that whoever casts off the yoke of Torah and the commandments and shaves off their beard and side locks is considered a complete apostate for the entire Torah. For the first step of all those who become apostates is the shaving off the side locks and the beard, with which they remove from themselves all distinguishing signs of the holy Jewish people. This is based upon what is written in Likutey Halakhot, Part 1, 23, that there are faces of holiness, which are shining faces, corresponding to life, as written, "In the light of the countenance of a king is life," Proverbs 16:15, corresponding to joy. And there are faces of the realm of evil, which are darkened faces, melancholy, idolatry. Explained there is that whoever is submerged in the lust for money is bound to the face of the realm of evil, foreign gods, darkness, corresponding to death, whereas those who conduct their business dealings faithfully are bound to the holy light of the countenance. For there is no faith without truth, and truth is the light of the countenance. Study all this there well. Section 1. The most important thing is the face, for the essence of all things in the world is its face, just as the essence of the human being is in the face. This is because the entire mind, intelligence, and speech are all in the face, as written, "The wisdom of a human being makes their face shine." Ecclesiastes 8:1. And all human interactions, whether in Torah or in business dealings, all take place through the face, in which are the wisdom and the speech, which are the essence of the human being. And in the same way, all things in the world have a face, which is the essence of that thing, the face of that thing. Thus, every individual must look at the face of all things, which is its essence, for the essence of all things, which corresponds to its face, is the truth, and the truth corresponds to the face. As written in this lesson, and as stated in the Kabbalistic intentions pre-Etz Chaim, Slichot, for the truth is the light of the countenance, and as also explained in Likutey Halakhot, Part 1, 192, that the truth is the face of all holy faces. Study there. And truth is one, as the Rebbe writes elsewhere, Likutey Halakhot, Part 1, 51 and 251, meaning that the essence of anything, which is the face of that thing, is only the truth, which is one, which is the divine vitality embodied in that thing, which is its essence. For God is the essence and root of all worlds, and whoever looks into everything for the divine vitality that dwells in it, which is the essence of truth, is looking at the face of that thing, which is its essence, as said. This is the entire service of a human being in this world, to constantly seek in all things in the world for the face and essence, which is the truth, which is God, who is the ultimate essence of truth. He is one and not two, the essence and root of all worlds, who created all things and continuously sustains all things in the world, which is the essence of the face of all things in the world. For they all receive their vitality from God, which corresponds to their face and essence. For every individual must seek God at all times, as written, "Seek His countenance at all times." Psalms 105, 4 and Regarding you, my heart says, seek my countenance. There, 27:8. And this is a generation that constantly seeks your countenance. There, 24:6. For the truth corresponds to God's countenance. For whoever comes to know the clear truth as it is just as it is true, that God created everything from absolute nothingness and sustains everything in His will, overseeing everything with individual providence, this true knowledge corresponds to an illumination of God's countenance, for the truth is the face of all faces, as said. In other words, when one knows the truth, this corresponds to an illumination of the countenance, just as in the physical example of a human king. As long as the king is hidden in his chambers and no one is able to see him, his face is hidden. But when he reveals himself to his people and they see him, this is an illumination of the face, in that he shows his face that had been hidden from them until then. Similarly, God is the King of Kings who cannot be seen with physical eyes, and even with the eyes of the intelligence can only be sensed by each individual to the extent of their ability, as stated in the Holy Zohar Part 1, 103b. So, when God helps a human being and a knowing of God's truth shines into one's mind, this corresponds to an illumination of the countenance. This is what we always pray for. May God shine His countenance upon us forever. Psalm 67:2. Shine your countenance upon your servant. There, 31:17 and 119, 135. The priests are instructed to bless the Jewish people with this, as written, May God shine His countenance toward you. Numbers 6:25. For that is the most important thing, to attain an illumination of God's countenance. For the truth is the face of all faces, as said. Section 2. However, the light of the countenance can only be received through faith. For the essence of the countenance, which is truth, which is knowledge of the truth of His godliness, is impossible to receive on account of a profusion of light. For if God's truth were to be manifested clearly for all to see, the world would cease to exist. For even the light of the sun cannot be looked at directly on account of the profusion of light, so much more so this great and awesome light. That is why God, in His compassion, desiring the perpetuation of the world, constricted and hid the light of truth, which is the light of the countenance, as in, indeed, you are a hiding God, Isaiah 45:15. And specifically, through many constrictions, it is possible to know of His truth. With wondrous wisdom, God constricted the truth in many and various constrictions, in wondrous and awesome ways, such that faith came into existence, in that in His wondrous wisdom, He shined into the human being the holy faith through imprinting the truth of His godliness in the human soul, through which the human being is able to have faith in the truth, even though he does not yet see the truth with his intelligence. And faith is the essence of knowledge, as in, I betroth you to me with faith, and you will know God. Hosea 2:21. For faith is the essence of knowledge. We see this even on the physical plane. Ultimately, clear knowledge is specifically through faith in one person's having faith in another. The world could not survive without faith in each one's having faith in another, for without faith, there could be no business dealings. For instance, if one wants to know the price of a certain merchandise in a distant place, such as the price of wheat in Odessa or in Istanbul, or even further, if one would not want to rely faithfully on others, one could never know the price. For even if one were the greatest sage and conducted analyses using many very intelligent assumptions and logic that led him to the conclusion that the price should now be expensive, nevertheless, that knowledge based upon those assumptions and data is not knowledge at all. For we have already seen many times that logic deemed that wheat should be expensive, yet it was very cheap. And the same is true of all merchandise and business dealings. Knowledge based on assumptions and logic is not knowledge at all. And whoever wants to attain clear knowledge of the price of any merchandise must inevitably rely on someone faithful whom one has chosen to be reliable and whom one knows to be one's true friend. So when this faithful source writes one about the price of any merchandise, this is undoubtedly clear knowledge, even though one does not logically understand any rationale how the price can now be such and such. And in fact, logic deems that it should be just the opposite. Nevertheless, one knows with clear and true knowledge that the price is such and such through one's faith in one's faithful friend who will certainly not lie to them and is certainly writing the truth. Hence, clear knowledge is only through faith. For the world cannot survive without faith, since all business dealings in the world and all human interactions are impossible without faith. Even if one is a very great scholar, if one insists on not doing any business dealings until one will know the details of the transaction with one's personal wisdom and not want to empower anyone else because one does not rely on anyone, one would certainly be unable to do any business dealings at all, for all business dealings must inevitably be carried out through a group of people, each one inevitably having to have faith in the other, without which no business dealings could ever be completed, as is empirically evident and clear. However, each individual must seek a faithful person upon whom one can rely, and without such faith in another person, it would be impossible for one to execute any business dealings, especially ones executed in distant places. All trust between people comes from the power of the holy faith that we must have in God, in His tzaddikim, and in His holy Torah. In that God created in the human being the power of faith, so that he will have the power and choice to have faith in the truth, from which devolve the faith and trust between human beings, which allows for the survival of the world. That is why, indeed, our sages said, whoever steps back from his word is as if he worshipped an idol. Sanhedrin 92a. For when one lies to another in some business dealing and lacks trustworthiness, one blemishes in the holy faith and is literally considered as having worshipped an idol. For trust between human beings comes from the holy faith, as said. Section 3. In sum, the continued existence of the world is sustained by faith. As written, all His works are with faith. Psalms 33:4. And the entire Torah stands upon faith. As written, all your commandments are faith, there. 119:86. And, as our sages said, Habakkuk established them all on one thing: a righteous one lives by his faith. Makot 24a. This is because, thank God, we have a truly faithful person who is trustworthy to rely on, such that we know what to acquire in this world. This person is Moses, our teacher, who brought us eternal success and informed us what we need to acquire in this world that is so very distant from the upper worlds. We have only come into this world to deal with merchandise at a very great distance, where we will be extremely successful and earn great profit, specifically with the merchandise that we acquired in this material world, a very wondrous and awesomely great profit, immeasurably great, which no eye has seen. Likutey Moharan, Part 2, 55. However, no one knows precisely which merchandise will earn one a profit in that very distant world during our stay in our world, from which we must return to there. That is why God had compassion on us and sent us a truly faithful shepherd, Moses, about whom is written, "He is faithful throughout my house." Numbers 12:7. And Moses had compassion on us and brought us success by opening our eyes and teaching us the entire Torah and commandments that he gave to us from the mouth of God, telling us of all the holy merchandise that we need to acquire in this world, such as the donning of the tzitzit, the laying of tefillin, and all the other holy and awesome commandments. So now, we certainly have no need to waste time analyzing if one will be successful with this merchandise. And surely, whoever does analyze this, besides being a heretic, is also an imbecile, a fool, an idiot, and deranged, for he seeks to be wise for evil, to analyze such a faithful person as this, Doc, and attempts to know and understand, specifically with his own intelligence, why he will succeed with this merchandise. Is there a greater idiot than this? Trustworthy people and authentic sages as these have written to him, that he should hasten to acquire this merchandise with immediate promptness and meticulousness, because he will earn from it an immeasurably huge fortune. Yet this person intentionally is lax and seeks to first analyze the rationale why this merchandise is so important there. Meanwhile, he negligently does not acquire this merchandise and wastes his days in emptiness and meaninglessness, eventually arriving there in disgrace and shame, completely empty-handed of all good, and even worse, if he brings there items that are forbidden to bring there, and for which one is punished very severely and harshly with unbearable suffering. Woe for that shame! Woe for that disgrace! The intent of the parable is self-evident. Moses, our teacher, and all the tzaddikim, early and later prophets, all the sages of the Talmud and Mishnah, have written us to meticulously fulfill Moses' Torah, because we will thereby be very successful in the world of the future. They are faithful people, understanding sages who truly love us, and we certainly don't need to analyze them, but to have faith in them and to follow in their ways, through which we will be able to acquire all the holy merchandise, which is the Torah and the commandments. We have no need to waste our days on any analyses about them, but to devote all our days to gathering and collecting this merchandise that is more precious than gold and pearls, to which nothing can compare. This is why King Solomon praised the holy faith with, "Who can find a valorous woman?" Proverbs 31:10. The holy faith is called a valorous woman because truth and faith correspond to man and woman. Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 17. So Solomon praises faith, which is a valorous woman, throughout that chapter, in the terms of profit and success in merchandise, in her bringing great profit from her merchandise, as expressed throughout this amazing poetry from beginning to end. This is, as said, that the ultimate success of the human being with the holy merchandise, true and eternal success, comes through the woman of valor, which is the holy faith that is called a woman of valor, as said, and as brought throughout the writings of the Ari. That faith corresponds to Malchut, which corresponds to a God-fearing woman, to a valorous woman, which is, as said. Thus, she was like merchant ships, bringing her food from afar. Proverbs 31:14, meaning that through the holy faith that we rely on Moses and on the tzaddikim to follow in his ways, we are thereby able to deal in merchandise from afar and to bring back food and sustenance for eternity from great distances, even though we have no idea what merchandise is needed there, since the true, faithful person has already informed us what we need to bring to there, so that we will always be successful there, as said. Section 4. Hence, knowledge of the truth, which corresponds to the face, is through faith, which comes through constrictions that come from very exalted and awesome intelligences that God used to constrict his light in wondrous ways and constrictions, thereby bringing forth faith, through which the world is able to endure. For faith, though it is below intelligence, is only possible in what the intelligence cannot understand. Nevertheless, in its root, it comes from a very exalted and sublime place that is higher from all intelligences, for faith corresponds to, "I am first and I am last." Isaiah 44. 6 to, "Who tells the end from the beginning?" there, 46. 10 to, "The ultimate act existing in the initial thought," as explained elsewhere in Laws of a Menstruate Woman. Law 2. These holy constrictions, with which God constricted his light, such that it is only possible to know the truth through faith, as said, correspond to hairs, which are the waste product of the mind, through which the entire rectification of the worlds came about, in that the lights were constricted, until they became hairs, through which vitality and intelligence are channeled from level to level and from world to world. Etz Chaim 13:11, Mevo Shurim 3:2-7. However, since the hairs correspond to constrictions, which correspond to judgments, when they grow too much, they provide nourishment for the realm of evil, so they must be cut. But there are hairs that are very holy and exalted, through which intelligence and vitality are channeled, and these are the hairs of the holy sidelocks and beard. The entire construction of the worlds and all channeling of knowledge of God come through these holy constrictions that come through these very holy and world awesome hairs. This is because the hairs of the sidelocks and the beard come from a very exalted, sublime, and awesome place, from the Atik, for the manifestation of godliness, the channeling of the holy faith, is through these hairs that are wondrous constrictions that come from an extremely sublime and exalted intelligence, from Atik, which, on account of the awesomely amazing greatness of this intelligence, is able to constrict itself in wondrous constrictions until an illumination of the holy faith is channeled into the human intelligence, such that we are able to have faith in the truth, even though we do not yet understand it with our intelligence. This is because faith is the wonders of the one of complete knowledge, as in, I thank your name, for you have done wonders, strategies from afar. Faithful faith, Isaiah 25:1, and I thank you, for I am awesomely amazed. Your acts are wondrous, and my soul knows well. Psalms 139:14, as explained elsewhere in Laws of a Menstruate Woman, Law 2. Thus, these holy hairs of the sidelocks and the beard are the essence of the glory and the light of the countenance. As written, you shall glorify the face of an elder, Leviticus 19:32. Shabbat 152a. For the essence of truth, which is the face, is impossible to receive or perceive other than through the holy faith, which is why faith is called the light of the countenance, as explained in the lesson. This corresponds to the hairs of the human sidelocks and beard, which correspond to the holy constrictions through which is channeled faith, which is the essence of the light of the countenance. For through faith we know the truth, which is the face. And as long as we have not attained faith, it is impossible to receive the essence of truth on account of a profusion of light. That is why the face, which is the truth, only shines through faith, through which we know the truth, which is why faith is the light of the countenance. This corresponds to the hairs of the sidelocks and the beard, which are the essence of the glory and the light of the countenance, as said, for it is impossible to know of God, who is the ultimate truth, on account of a profusion of light other than through faith. For then, when we attain full faith, we know the truth, which is why the essence of the light of the countenance, which is the truth, is faith, which comes through the hairs of the sidelocks and the beard. Section 5. For truth and faith are two that are one. Whoever has faith in the truth is connected to the truth as if he knows it with his intelligence, with no difference between the two ways of knowing. On the contrary, the ultimate truth can only be known through faith, for truth and faith correspond to man and woman, regarding which is said, it is not good for the man to be alone. I will make for him a support at his side. Genesis 2:18. The man corresponding to the truth, which corresponds to man, should not be alone, for it is impossible to benefit from the truth and to be productive through it alone, since it is impossible to receive the essence of the truth. So God said that he would make for the man a support at his side, which is the God-fearing woman, the valorous woman who corresponds to the holy faith, which is a Kala bride, in that it is Klula comprised of all praiseworthy attributes mentioned in the Song of Songs Nachmanides, Genesis 24:1, since the holy faith is comprised of everything, because all sublime perceptions and all knowledge of God are impossible to receive other than through faith. This is because faith is a bone from his bones and flesh from his flesh of the truth, since the two are actually one, and it is impossible for one to exist without the other. And the entire existence of the world is specifically through the both, which indeed are one, as in, they shall become one flesh. Genesis 2:24. For when one has full faith in the truth, faith merges into the truth with utmost oneness, through which are born all the perceptions of knowledge of truth of his godliness. For it is impossible to know of God other than through the merging of truth and faith, as in, I will betroth you with faith, and you shall know God. Since truth without faith is impossible to receive on account of a profusion of light, and faith without truth is certainly worthless. Since when one does not look at the truth, then one has false faiths that are idolatry, foreign gods of the realm of evil, as explained in the lesson. The sustaining of the holy faith is through truth, as in, when tzedek bonds with truth, it becomes faith. Zohar, Part 3, 198b, meaning, when one looks at the authentic truth, then one certainly sees with one's own eyes that it is proper to have faith in our holy ancestors and authentic tzaddikim who urged us to fulfill our holy Torah. See Laws of Pesach, number 7. Then it becomes faith. In that one attains full faith, and then truth and faith merge together, since in fact the two are one. Through this are all perceptions and knowledge born, for through faith one then attains very exalted perceptions and knowledge, as explained elsewhere, Likutey Halakhot, Part 1, 91. Through these perceptions and knowledge, one literally gives birth to souls, for through all the very exalted perceptions that the tzaddikim perceive by having merged truth and full faith, they thereby are able to instill faith into the hearts of Jewish souls, which is the ultimate wholeness of the perception of the tzaddikim. With each exalted perception that they have of the very sublime and exalted intelligence, they are able to constrict those perceptions of godliness with such wondrous constrictions, such that they are able to instill the holy faith in the hearts of all the souls that are so very lowly and distant from God. All this can be understood from the lesson in Likutey Halakhot, Part 130, that the weaker the ill one, the greater the healer that is needed to instill into them perceptions of godliness. Study there. This corresponds to the hairs of the side locks and the beard, which are exalted and awesome constrictions that come from such a sublime and exalted place, such that through these constrictions of these holy hairs are the ways of faith channeled even into the lowest of lowest levels. For the higher the place from which the constrictions come, the more they are able to clothe the intelligence and transmit it even into the very lowly. That is why the essence of the Jewishness of the Jewish people is through the beard and side locks. For as long as one does not remove one's side locks and beard, no matter what one is like, one still has a sign of Jewishness, and the holy faith can still be instilled into them, and they can still return to God easily. However, once one has cast off one's Jewishness and removed one's beard and side locks, one is suspect of transgressing the entire Torah and has become ultimately distant from faith, for the holy faith is channeled through the hairs of the beard and side locks. Section 6. This explains what we see for ourselves in Germany and its environs, that in our many sins the Jews there have breached the wall of Jewishness, have altered the laws, betrayed the covenant, and with revulsion have shaved off their beards. That is why heresy is so widespread there, and why they study foreign books and are very distant from the holy faith, for the two are interdependent. The holy faith comes through the hairs of the beard and side locks, as said, which is why there is no faith in the sages there at all. And they oppose all the great and authentic tzaddikim, whom we have been privileged to have in these generations since the times of the Baal Shem Tov and his holy followers, and they also firmly oppose the writings of the Ari and the holy Zohar as well known. This is because the illumination of the beard and side locks comes through the great and authentic tzaddikim, who are called the Zikni elders of the generation Zaken, as in Zech Kana Kochma, This one has attained wisdom. Kiddushin 32b, who evoke upon us an illumination of the 13 rectification of the holy Zakan beard, which are the 13 fundamental principles upon which the Torah can be interpreted, from which the holy faith is channeled into each individual through the hairs of the beard and side locks of each Jewish person. But those who shave off their beards are uprooting themselves from all this, for they are removing the hair of their beards and side locks from themselves, and thereby also uprooting themselves from the authentic tzaddikim, who are the zekainim of the generation, through whom comes the illumination of the holy zakan of each individual Jewish person, and are thereby also uprooting themselves from the holy faith that is channeled through the holy zekainim, through the hairs of the beard and the side locks. Woe to them, woe to their souls. And as the holy Zohar says, woe to the one who lays a hand on the beard, Zohar, Part 3, 130b. Woe to us! Woe that this has befallen us in our boundaries. For due to our many sins, even in our countries, there are sinners and deniers who have cast off the yoke and have removed their beards in public, transgressing the entire Torah in public. And if that was not enough, they also opened their mouths inappropriately to speak against the God-fearing with smears and mockery for not following them in their evil ways. Many Jewish youths have been trapped in their evil net. May God have compassion on our remnant and spare our children and all Jewish children from them. Section 7. This is, therefore a man will leave his father and mother and bond with his wife, and they will become one flesh. Genesis 2:24. Father and mother correspond to the intellectual faculties, father to wisdom and mother to understanding. Genesis Rabbah 93. Tikkuni Zohar 69:106b. This means that one must abandon all wisdoms and bind oneself entirely to the God-fearing woman, the valorous woman who corresponds to the holy faith. For the ultimate manifestation of the authentic truth comes through her, as in, they shall become one flesh. For truth and faith are in one, in ultimate oneness, as said. Section 8. This corresponds to the Omer counting, during which we first count 7 complete weeks, in which we evoke and rectify all of the 7 attributes, sfirot, which are holy constrictions. We therefore count from the day of the Omer offering. For the barley, Omer offering corresponds to the totality of all constrictions, which correspond to a sorah, a single grain of barley, numerically equivalent to twice mansapach, the letters of the aleph bait that have unique forms when used as a final letter in a word, as stated in the Kabbalistic intentions Pri Etz Chaim. Sfirat HaOmer 4, for they are the totality of all holy constrictions. These constrictions correspond to the sarat hairs that we are busy rectifying and channeling through the days of the counting, through which we are able to receive the light of the countenance on Shavuot, which corresponds to the receiving of the Torah, to the 70 facets of the Torah numbers, Rabbah 13:15, as in, face to face, God spoke with you, Deuteronomy 5:4, through the attributes and constrictions, which correspond to the holy sarat that we channeled throughout the days of the counting, we are thereby able to receive the light of the countenance, which corresponds to receiving the Torah on Shavuot. That is why on Shavuot we recite the Idra Rabbah that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai revealed, which speaks of the 13 rectifications of the holy beard, for that is the essence of Shavuot. On Shavuot, God appeared as a Zaken elder Mechilta, Yitro, for receiving the Torah, which corresponds to the light of the countenance, can only take place through the Esarot Hazakan hairs of the beard, which are the ultimate rectification of all worlds, as evident from the Kabbalistic writings. That is why the days of the countings are called 7 weeks, as written, you shall count for yourselves from the day after the Shabbat, 7 weeks, until the day after the 7th Shabbat. Leviticus 23:15. The essence of the counting is to rectify and channel the holy attributes and constrictions, until there will be a rectification of the holy faith, which corresponds to the Shabbat queen, which is called Kala. For it is Klula, comprised of everything, since Shabbat corresponds to faith, as brought in the Rebbe's writings Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 31 and elsewhere. For the ultimate rectification of all the attributes and constrictions is for the sake of faith, which is the ultimate rectification, since it is impossible to know of God other than through faith, which is the seventh attribute corresponding to Shabbat. Section 9. These holy constrictions which correspond to faith, through which comes an illumination of the countenance, which is truth, correspond to holy money. Holy money is very sublime, as the Rebbe writes Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 25 and elsewhere. So whoever conducts their business dealings with faith and rejoices in their lot is bound to the holy countenance, as stated in the lesson. This is because when one conducts business dealings with faith and rejoices in their lot, having faith that everything is entirely from God, then one's money is holy money, which comes through the holy constrictions, as said. Money comes from the constrictions, which correspond to the left side, as in, on its left side, wealth and honor. Proverbs 3:16. Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 68. And when one conducts their business dealings with faith, then one's money comes from the holy constrictions, which correspond to the hairs of the beard, as in, children. Life and sustenance are not dependent upon merit, but upon mazal moed katan. 28a, which are the two mazals, the two sections of the beard that shall flow down over the neck, which are the most important parts of the holy beard. As explained in the writings of the Ari Etz Chaim 13:9, however, when one blemishes in money and falls into the lust for money, then one's money comes from other hairs, which are the waste product of the mind that must specifically be cut off. For the power of the realm of evil, of the darkened faces, idolatry, come from them. So throughout the days of the Omer counting, we are involved in evoking holy sustenance and money through the holy constrictions that correspond to holy hairs that we channel during the Omer counting, for that is where holy sustenance comes from. We thus pray at the counting, earth has given its produce, may God bless us, Psalms 67:7, and may God shine his countenance upon us forever. There, verse 2. For we are asking that through the counting, through which the holy constrictions and attributes are rectified, may we thereby attain holy sustenance, as in, earth has given its produce, through which we will attain an illumination of God's countenance. Therefore, the manna began to come down during the days of the Omer counting, first coming down on the 15th of Iyar Rashi, Exodus 16:35. This is because the manna corresponds to holy sustenance, in that we have faith that all sustenance comes only from God, and that just as he sustained our ancestors and sent them down manna for 40 years, so will he sustain us now in his compassion. For the Torah was only given to those who eat manna mechilta, beshalach. In other words, it is impossible to receive the Torah, which corresponds to the countenance, other than through holy sustenance, which corresponds to manna. For, if there is no flour, there is no Torah, and if there is no Torah, there is no flour. Avot 3:17. Since the Torah and holy sustenance need each other, for they correspond to truth and faith, which in fact are together one. Understand this well, for I have not explained it well. Much is missing, since it was not written down at the time. Laws of a man not wearing a woman's clothes, and the prohibition of balding and slitting the flesh. Section 10. This corresponds to, a man's clothing shall not be on a woman, and a man shall not wear a woman's dress. Deuteronomy 22:5. As explained in the lesson in Likutey Moharan, Part 1:7, the most important thing is faith, which corresponds to the land of Israel, to rain, to prayer, miracles, and so forth. But it is impossible to reach faith other than through the truth, as in, when righteousness is merged with truth, faith comes about. Zohar, Part 3, 198b. And truth is reached by accepting the counsel of the tzaddikim, which correspond to entirely seed of truth, Jeremiah 2:21, to holy marriage. For the counsel that we receive from them literally corresponds to drops of seed. This is because the counsel comes from the mind, in which is the root of counsel, after which it enters the kidneys. For it is the kidneys that actually give counsel, brachot 61a, which is literally the same process as with the reproductive drops that come from the mind to the kidneys, which are Kabbalistically reproductive organs. Thus, when we receive counsel from the tzaddikim, we are receiving from them seed of truth, through which we attain faith. And inversely, when we receive counsel from the wicked, this corresponds to marriage with the klipa shell, as in, the serpent Hai Shiani seduced me. Genesis 3:13, from the same root word as nisuin, marriage. For the advice that Eve received from the serpent corresponds to marriage with the klipa shell, as in, the serpent implanted filth in Eve, Shabbat 146a, through the advice she received from it. But the counsel that we receive from the tzaddikim corresponds to seed of truth, to holy marriage. For through it we attain faith, which corresponds to righteousness, which, when merged with truth, becomes faith. And through the mitzvah of tzitzit we are spared from the counsel of the serpent, from marriage with the klipa shell, from sexual immorality, and attain the counsel of the tzaddikim that corresponds to the 613 strategies of the Torah to truth, through which we attain faith, through which the redemption will come about. As explained at the end of the lesson, that the merging of truth and faith correspond to man and woman. Study all this there well. Section 11. Prior to the sin of Adam, it is said, they were both naked, Adam and Eve, and were not embarrassed. Genesis 2:25. There was no clothing at that time. For before the sin, their conjugal relations were entirely a merging of truth and faith, without any tinge of the realm of evil. So they had nothing to be embarrassed about, and had no need for clothing. But after the sin, the filth of the serpent became attached to them, and the filth of the serpent is essentially the counsel that Eve received, corresponding to the counsel of the wicked, which corresponds to the filth that the serpent implanted in Eve, corresponding to marriage with the klipa shell. Ever since, the filth of the serpent is attached to conjugal relations, such that all conjugal relations, even permissible ones, are under the sway of the inclination for evil, Zohar, Part 1, 61a, and the essence of the sway of the inclination for evil over conjugal relations corresponds to the counsel of the wicked, the counsel of the serpent, from which comes all the passion of the inclination for evil. This is because the essence of the inclination for evil is a foreign god. Denials, which gives rise to sexual lust, as the Rebbe writes elsewhere, Sichot Haran 106, and all denial, blemishing of faith, come from the counsel of the serpent. For just as through the counsel of the tzaddikim we receive truth, similarly the inverse. Through the counsel we receive from the wicked and from those distant from truth, faith is thereby blemished, giving rise to denials and confusions in faith, which gives rise to sexual lust, as said. So from then on, ever since the filth of the serpent, which corresponds to a blemish in truth and in faith, became attached to human beings, we need clothing. As stated in there, God made for Adam and his wife garments of leather and clothed them. Genesis 3:21. Prior to the counsel of the serpent, the counsel of the wicked being attached to them, they could receive the light of truth and faith without any garments, for they could clearly see the truth and the faith, for they saw with their own eyes the truth of knowledge of God through faith. For indeed, in their root, truth and faith are entirely one. For the root of truth and faith corresponds to, the ultimate knowledge is to know that we know nothing. And Adam and Eve perceived the truth with ultimate knowledge, seeing and knowing with clear knowledge the truth of his godliness, that it is impossible to know of him other than through faith. Even now, there are phenomena that human beings know clearly as being facts. though they have no rational understanding of how such phenomena can exist. And the same is true of the entire creation. The scientists themselves acknowledge that a lack of rational understanding does not preempt the possibility of something existing, as if an inability to understand something rationally proves that it cannot exist. For we witness ourselves things that if we would not see with our own eyes, we would certainly not understand in any rational way how they can be. Yet, nevertheless, we see that they do in fact exist. For instance, if someone born in the wilderness, who had never met someone of the opposite sex, was told that his coming into the world and very existence came about through a drop of human fluid held securely within a human belly for 9 months, they would certainly deny and mock that possibility vehemently, yet we see that this is in fact the case. And the same with all phenomena in the world, for which there is no rationale predicating their reality. There is obviously no rational explanation to understand how a single seed grows to such a large tree with so many fruit growing out of it for many years, and that in each and every fruit there are countless seeds from each of which can be planted many more such trees, and the same with all details of creation. As David said, "How many are your deeds, O God?" Psalms 104:24, and "How great are your deeds, O God?" there. 92:6, not to speak of the countless awesome wonders that we have seen with our eyes, such as the splitting of the Red Sea, the manna, the well, and more. Hence, a person can witness something which cannot be understood with any rational logic that forces them to strengthen themselves in faith. But before Adam's sin, knowledge of the truth was clear with utmost clarity, such that they knew that it is impossible to know anything without faith. For in fact, at the root, truth and faith are both one with utmost oneness. However, after the sin, when the counsel of the serpent had taken hold of them, it is therefore no longer possible to receive the light of truth and faith other than through many garments, which correspond to the totality of the Torah that Moses gave us, which itself became clothed in many garments, which is the mystery of the rabbinical garment, Zohar, Part 3, 152a, 210a. Similarly, all the novel Torah teachings that the tzaddikim of each generation teach, explaining to us the ways of the Torah, which are essentially truth and faith, as written, "A Torah of truth," Malachi 2:6, and "All your commandments are faith," Psalms 119:86, meaning that it is impossible to receive truth and faith other than through many garments and introductory principles that the tzaddikim explain to us through their amazing Torah teachings. For all of the novel Torah teachings that the tzaddikim reveal to us are all in order to instill in us faith, as can be understood from the Rebbe's words, Sichot Haran 219. All their words are introductory principles that are meant to instill in us complete faith in the truth, and which correspond to garments in which they clothe the truth and the faith. From there devolve all the garments in the world that came into existence since Adam's sin, which are a great rectification to prevent the filth of the serpent, the counsel of the wicked from being able to seize onto the truth and the faith and to blemish them. The garments keep them away and distant from coming close to the truth and the faith, for garments come from the mystery of the chashmal that comes from Bina Pri Etz Chaim, Tefillah 3. This corresponds to tzitzit, which are the rectification of garments, all garments devolving from them, and the ultimate rectification of the channeling of truth and faith into the world is through them. As explained in the lesson, that through tzitzit we are spared from the counsel of the wicked and attain the counsel of the tzaddikim, which is entirely seed of truth, through which we attain the truth. Hence, the channeling of truth and faith is through the tzitzit, which correspond to the rectification of the garments from which all garments in the world are derived. Thus, the entire Torah is dependent upon tzitzit, as written, "You shall see them and remember all of God's commandments, so that you will remember and do all of my commandments." Numbers 15:39. For the fulfillment of the Torah, which corresponds to truth and faith, is attained through the rectification of the garments, which correspond to tzitzit. All garments require rectification, which is attained through tzitzit. For since garments are external to the human being, and therefore adjacent to the external forces, therefore those forces attach themselves to the corners of the garments. Pri Etz Chaim. Rosh Chodesh 3, as in rabbinical garments become worn out by those forces. Brachot 6a. That is why they must be rectified by the tzitzit, which are the rectification of garments, through which all garments in the world are rectified, through which the channeling of truth and faith into the world is rectified. Section 12. This corresponds to the prohibition of a man wearing a woman's dress. There are garments of truth, from which devolve a man's clothing, and garments of faith, from which devolve a woman's clothing. For man and woman at their root correspond to truth and faith. This is because whatever truth about anything that a human being understands with intelligence corresponds to truth, and whatever is not understood with intelligence but only believed in corresponds to faith. The essence of all wisdom is truth. For even if some great wisdom and intelligence dictates that such and such should be the case, if the truth is otherwise, that is certainly not wisdom at all, but in fact error and foolishness. Even all the great scientists agree that the most important element of wisdom is to reach the truth of something. For instance, in medicine, if a doctor would say that based upon medical science, a certain patient should eat strong and sharp foods, for that will surely heal them and revive them from their illness, supporting this with proof, intelligent arguments, and deep wisdom, if nevertheless the truth is otherwise, and a patient who followed this advice became even more ill and died specifically on account of the prescribed protocol, and all the doctors personally witnessed that the patient died specifically from this, the wisdom of the prescribing doctor is certainly not considered wisdom at all, since specifically through that wisdom he killed the patient. The same with all things in the world. As long as one has not reached the truth of something, it is not wisdom at all. And we see the same thing in Torah study. There are those who are able to interpret a passage in the Talmud with great acumen, yet nevertheless, one who looks at the authentic truth will realize that the true meaning of the text is otherwise. Certainly such acumen and casuistry are worthless, for it is meaningless hair-splitting, and the law will not be based upon this opinion, but upon the true meaning of the text. And though our sages said that God enjoys lively debate, that is only if one's intention is to reach the truth, that one seeks the truth in the Torah and debates it with acumen in order to understand the truth. Only then does God have pleasure from peppered arguments in the Holy Torah, even if the truth is not reached. For the entirety of the Holy Torah corresponds to truth, and the more one brings one's mind into studying and arguing with the intention for the truth, it is all considered truth. Since one is studying Torah and leading oneself to the truth, only that one has not yet fully attained it. Regarding this, our sages said on the verse, "This error in your hand," Isaiah 3, Zix is va. This refers to the Torah, in that a person cannot understand it until one has erred in it. Gittin 43a. However, one whose intention is not for the truth, but only to debate or propound for the sake of honor-seeking, so that he will be considered a rabbi, to show off or irritate others, presenting empty arguments that are not focused on the truth, this person is certainly not wise at all, since he has veered from the truth on account of his wisdom and has not understood the truth of the subject matter and the law with his wisdom. And all the more so with other wisdom if, for instance, one is not focused on the truth of medicine. What benefit is there in his wisdom, when in fact he kills people with his evil wisdom? So in all wisdoms, the most important thing is the truth, which is to attain and reach the truth of the matter, as explained also in Laws of Pesach, number 7, based on this lesson. Hence, whatever truth of the matter one understands with their intelligence is called truth, and whatever one is unable to understand but believes in is called faith. However, truth and faith at their root are both one. As said, for the essence of truth and faith is to know God, His holy Torah, and His authentic tzaddikim, which is the ultimate purpose for which the human being was created. As written, let not the wise boast in their wisdom, but in this shall the boaster boast in knowing me. Jeremiah 9:22. And knowing God, His holy Torah, and His authentic tzaddikim is impossible other than through the merging of truth and faith together, because it is impossible to actually see the truth with the eyes of intelligence on account of the great light, for no thought can contain God. And even after searching and looking, what can one know Zohar? Part 1, 1b. Therefore we must rely only on faith, as we have received from our holy ancestors and teachers. For the same reason, it is impossible to know the rationale of any commandment, for the commandments are inherent in God's oneness. So it is impossible to understand their rationale in this world, in this body. As written, for every endeavor I have seen an end, but your commandment is exceedingly broad. Psalms 119:96. Similarly, the holiness of the authentic tzaddikim is impossible to understand, for their ways are exalted beyond ours, since they make their form resemble He who formed it. Genesis Rabbah 27:1, and are merged into Him. So it is impossible to understand their ways with our intelligence, and we must rely only on faith. But faith is not complete without truth. As said, for faith without truth is worthless, since without truth one can fall into false faiths, into foolish and empty faiths. That is why faith must be founded upon truth, and when one sincerely seeks the truth, one will attain the authentic holy faith. For truth then shines into the person to distance themselves from false faiths and to strengthen themselves in the authentic holy faith. See Laws of Pesach, number 7. This is attained by coming close to the tzaddikim and receiving their advice, which corresponds to truth, through which truth is engraved into the individual, and one attains the authentic holy faith and distances oneself from false faiths. This is because the words of the authentic tzaddikim correspond to garments in which they clothe the truth and the faith through which they introduce truth into the world, for people to distance themselves from false faiths and to cleave to the holy faith. For though faith is only in something that the intelligence cannot understand, nevertheless, whoever looks at the truth is able to see and understand the difference and contrast between the holy faith that we received from our holy ancestors since the days of Abraham through Moses, who gave us the Torah through unprecedented, awesome signs and wonders. As written, has a people ever heard? Ask about early days. And has such a thing ever happened or ever been heard of? But you witnessed Deuteronomy 4:29, and the ultimate opposite, the false faiths of foolishness and emptiness that they received from whoever they received, whose lies and wantonness are well known and infamous. May the spirits and souls of the heretics rot those who disingenuously sometimes classify together our holy and pure faith with the false faiths of foolishness and emptiness, as evident to anyone familiar with their evil ways. But this is not the place to expound on this, and the truth is self-evident and clear to whoever sincerely seeks the truth. This corresponds to, a man's clothing shall not be on a woman, and a man shall not wear a woman's dress. Deuteronomy 22:5. It is forbidden to exchange the garments, for that would nourish the klipat shells and the realm of evil that draw nourishment from the chambers of exchanges that exchange the truth by concealing it in garments and coverings of false faiths, exchanging the true faith by concealing it in the garments and coverings of their wisdom, exchanging truth with falsehood. In other words, they are sometimes able to convince people with their false faiths, concealing the truth, and calling upon people to accept the false faiths even though the people see for themselves that they are false, claiming that faith is only in what the intelligence cannot understand. or, inversely, convincing people to renounce the holy faith through their false truth, claiming that true intelligence does not support the people's faith. They are wise to do evil and know not how to do good. Jeremiah 4:22. Overturning the words of the living God, as written, "Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes, who call evil good and good evil." Isaiah 5:21. But thank God, who gave us the Torah of truth and separated us from those errants. In His compassion, He sends us in every generation authentic tzaddikim who imbue us with truth and faith. For through their holy words, which correspond to garments, they imbue us with authentically true wisdom to know how to veer from false faiths, from faiths of foolishness and emptiness, whose falseness is evident for all to see. For though faith is only in something that the intelligence cannot understand, nevertheless, through garments of truth, we can see and understand the authentic truth that their faiths are falsehoods and fabrications, emptiness and worthlessness. The tzaddikim, in their amazing wisdom, prepare garments for the holy faith in order to imbue us with the holy faith, to have faith in the truth despite our not understanding it with intelligence. They shine into us through their holy words that correspond to garments to look at the authentic truth, through which the holy faith is strengthened for each individual. For the truth is one, and it is utterly impossible to contradict the truth. As written, "A tongue of truth will endure forever." Proverbs 12:19. The tzaddikim shine the truth into us through their holy counsel, through which we attain the holy faith, as in, when righteousness is merged with truth, it becomes faith. Section 13. This is what Rashi means when he says on the verse, "A man shall not wear a woman's dress, because it causes sexual immorality." As said, sexual immorality is caused by denials that come from the heresies, that come from the counsel of the serpent, which is the counsel of the wicked who overturn the truth and seek to conceal the holy faith through a man's clothing, which corresponds to intelligence, claiming that intelligence does not support it, and inversely, seeking to overturn and conceal true intelligence through false faiths, which correspond to a woman's dress. This corresponds to sexual immorality, literally, for sexual immorality is essentially caused by this. Counsel corresponds to the drops of intelligence, as said, and just as in actual conjugal relations, whoever conducts themselves within the permissible and with holiness, according to the Torah, is performing a great mitzvah and will be privileged to bring souls into the world who will manifest godliness, which is the essence of the mitzvah, to have children in order to manifest the truth of God in the world, as in, generation to generation will praise your works. Psalms 145. 4. For holy conjugal relations corresponds to the merging of truth and faith, through which the knowledge of God's truth can be attained. Inversely, though, sexual immorality leads to denials, for all sexual lust comes from denials. As said, since denials blemish the seed of truth and attract the seed of falsehood, as in children of transgression, seed of falsehood, Isaiah 57, for thus exchanging the truth for falsehood and faith, which corresponds to a God-fearing woman, is exchanged for a prostituting woman who corresponds to false faiths. This corresponds to the exchanging of garments, a man's for a woman's and a woman's for a man's, which corresponds to sexual immorality, for the truth is thereby exchanged and concealed through their false faiths, while concealing the faith through their truth, which is really falsehood and fabrication. But God separated us from them and shined into us a point of truth through the authentic tzaddikim, who clothe the truth and the faith in a rabbinical garment, which is their awesome Torah teachings, through which they instill in us truth and faith, through which we are able to look at the truth and veer from false faiths, to strengthen ourselves in the holy faith even though we do not understand with intelligence. Laws of balding and slitting the flesh. Section 14. This corresponds to the prohibition of balding and slitting the flesh over the dead. Human flesh and hairs correspond to the chashmal, from where emerged the mystery of the garments, as explained in the Kabbalistic writings. All the rectifications of human flesh and hairs are solely for the purpose of illuminating into faith, which corresponds to the God-fearing woman who is flesh from Adam's flesh, and this illumination comes to her via the pores in the skin and of the hairs, as explained in the writings in Shar HaChashmal Etz Chaim 41. Study there. In Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 23, is explained that the essence of life is truth and hairs, which correspond to the light of the countenance, as in the light of the face of a king is life. Proverbs 16:15. 2. Thus, on account of Adam's sin, which was a blemish in truth by following the counsel of the serpent that misled them into analyzing and seeking to know what is impossible to know, which corresponds to the blemish of the eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, on account of which entered into the human being the inclination for evil to desire, to analyze, and to seek to know what is forbidden and impossible to know, as written regarding the serpent's enticement. For God knows that on the day you will eat of it, your eyes will be opened. Genesis 3, 5, and when the woman saw that the tree was good and desirable to become intelligent there. Verse 6. On account of this blemish, in truth and faith, death for all generations was decreed, which is the opposite of life that comes through truth and faith, which are the essence of life, as said. For now, after the sin, that the counsel of the serpent, which is the counsel of the wicked, has become attached to the human being, and all subsequent births, even of a mitzvah, are under the sway of the inclination for evil that comes from the counsel of the serpent, regarding which is said, Indeed, I was born in sin, and in sin my mother conceived me. Psalms 51:7. All human beings therefore require great toil to sort out and refine themselves from the filth of the serpent, which essentially is to sort out and refine oneself from the counsel of the wicked who conceal the truth, for they are the embodiment of the filth of the serpent, as in, the serpent Hishiani seduced me, as said above paragraph 10. This is why King David began his composition with, Fortunate is the man who has not followed the counsel of the wicked, for that is the essential totality of the Torah, to distance oneself from the counsel of the wicked, who are the embodiment of the filth of the serpent that Adam brought upon himself through the sin, which was the ultimate blemishing in truth and faith, which are the totality of the Torah, as said. On account of the attachment of the filth of the serpent, the counsel of the wicked, death was decreed upon the human being, for it is impossible to completely sort this out before death. When the body decomposes in the earth and the filth is completely dissolved, then, in the world of the future, after the resurrection, one will attain the ultimate illumination of truth and faith with utmost wholeness, knowing the truth of his godliness, which is the essence of the delight of the world of the future, that the righteous will attain. In the future fortunate are they. This corresponds to, For you are dust, and you will return to the dust. Genesis 3:19. Dust corresponds to faith, as in, Dwell in the earth and nurture faith. Psalms 37:3. Which is why the filth dissolves in it, and one returns to the holy faith with utmost wholeness, as prior to the sin, and even more. Then, after the resurrection, one will come to know God with completeness, to the extent of one's service in this world. For the reward of the future is to know God, that each individual will come to know Him to the extent of their service and toil in this world, as can be understood from Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 21. See there also, 64. This is why death is in fact a great boon, as written, It was very good, Genesis 1:31. Genesis Rabbah 9:5-4. Specifically, through death is filth dissolved, and one attains truth life, eternal life, as in, the righteous are called alive in their deaths. Brachot 18a. This corresponds to the prohibition of balding and slitting the flesh over the dead. It is forbidden to cause baldness, which is where there are hairs, or to slit the flesh over the dead, so as not to blemish the flesh or the hair through which faith is channeled. That is why the prohibition is specifically over the dead, so as not to empower the realm of death, which came about on account of the counsel of the serpent through the blemishing in truth and faith, which correspond to life. Because death comes through there, therefore, the realm of evil that hovers over the deceased is empowered and seeks to incite a person to excessive sadness and sorrow, to the extent that one removes the hairs of one's head or slits their flesh, which corresponds to a blemishing in truth and faith. So the Torah forbade us to do this, for we must in fact have faith that death was decreed on account of the counsel of the serpent, which was a blemish in truth and faith. But nevertheless, this decree was not a bane, but a boon, for through it is Adam's sin rectified. So as long as a human being is alive on earth, it is forbidden to damage one's flesh or hairs over the dead, for the deceased has moved on to death, for their time has come. And this is their ultimate rectification, while the living remain and must meticulously protect their flesh and hairs, for specifically through them is channeled an illumination of faith, which corresponds to life. This is, you are children of your God. Do not slit your flesh, and do not make baldness, for you are a holy people to your God. Deuteronomy 14:2. You are called children, Kiddushin 36a, as in children of the living God. Hosea 2:1, in contrast to servitude, which is death, as in, cursed be Canaan, he shall be a servant of servants. Genesis 9:25, which corresponds to, you are cursed, said to the serpent there, 3:14, through which death came about, as can be understood from Likutey Halakhot, Part 1. 7, that the curse of Canaan corresponds to the filth of the serpent. But the Jewish people are called children, for they are the opposite of the realm of death, which corresponds to servitude. Thus, even when the time of death comes for a Jewish person, they are still in the category of life. For all Jewish people are called tzaddikim, and the righteous are called alive in their deaths, since death is the ultimate peak of life, as said. Therefore, do not slit your flesh, and do not make baldness, so as not to blemish in the flesh and the hairs, through which is channeled faith, which corresponds to life. Laws of a menstruating woman and the mikveh. Section 15. This corresponds to the prohibition of a menstruating woman. Menstrual blood comes from the filth of the serpent that it implanted in Eve, which gave rise to menstrual blood. For at that time it was decreed on her, I will increase your pain, which corresponds to menstrual blood, Eruvin 100b. That is why it is prohibited to have conjugal relations with a menstruating woman, for it is then impossible to separate the conjugal relations from the filth of the serpent, which is menstrual blood that is now excessive in her. Even when conjugal relations are permissible, it requires great sorting out and refinement from the filth of the serpent. But now that menstrual blood, which is the embodiment of the filth of the serpent, has become aroused, it is therefore impossible to sort out the conjugal relations. So, the woman is severely prohibited to her husband. For this reason, she cannot become pure until she counts 7 clean days, paralleling the 7 days of creation, which correspond to the 7 attributes, Sfirot. For the culmination of the rectification of all the 7 attributes that correspond to the 7 days of creation is to shine into the Malchut, which is the 7th, and which corresponds to faith. This is because it is impossible to be nourished by or receive anything from any of the higher attributes other than through the Malchut, as explained at length in the Tikkuni Zohar paragraph 11, number 6, page 21b. No prophet or seer may ascend to the king other than through her, which corresponds to, with Zot this shall Aaron enter into the holy Leviticus 16. 3. For faith, which corresponds to the Malchut, which is called Zot. This is Zot that their father told them, Genesis 49:28. Zot is the blessing. Deuteronomy 33:1. And when the prophet Jeremiah saw the length of the exile, he said, Zot I will restore to my heart, therefore I yearn. Lamentations 3:21. It is impossible to come close to God and to know Him through any sphira, attribute, wisdom, or intelligence, other than through faith, which is called Zot, which is the gate and the doorway to come close to God and to know Him. For through faith we are able to enter into all the other attributes and to come close to God. Thus, a menstruating woman must count 7 clean days, for after menstrual blood has been aroused in her, which is the filth of the serpent, and she has become forbidden to join with her husband, who corresponds to truth, she can therefore not become purified until she counts 7 clean days, in order to evoke upon herself once again an illumination of all of the 7 attributes, whose completion is only when they shine into faith, Malkut, woman completing it so that it is able to join with its husband, which corresponds to truth. Section 16. This corresponds to the mikveh of water that purifies a menstruating woman from her impurity. The waters of the mikveh are the root of the growth of faith, for the mikveh corresponds to Bina, the world of the future, to the waters of intelligence that will be manifested in the future, as in, the earth will be filled with knowledge of God as the waters cover the seabed, Isaiah 11:9. From the holiness of this intelligence that will be manifested in the future comes forth the growth of faith that the tzaddikim channel upon us now. For the root of faith comes from a high place, a very exalted intelligence. Paragraph 4, which is the intelligence and knowledge that will be manifested in the future, as in, the earth will be filled with knowledge as the waters, which corresponds to the waters of the mikveh. This corresponds to what is written in Likutey Halakhot, Part 1:7, that rains correspond to faith. The waters of rain that come from the depths are rooted in the waters of intelligence that will be manifested in the future. So they correspond to faith, for they are the source of the growth of faith. It is also alluded in Likutey Halakhot, Part 2:5, that the growth of faith is through water, corresponding to, as deep waters is counsel in the human heart, Proverbs 25. Thus, in these waters of the mikveh that are the root of faith is a menstruating woman purified from her defilement, from the filth of the serpent, which is a blemish in faith. For through the waters of the mikveh, faith returns and grows completely. This corresponds to tzitzit, through which faith is channeled, as said paragraph 11. The light of the tzitzit also comes through the holy waters of the mikveh that correspond to Bina, world of the future, as in, a river emerges from Eden to water the garden, which corresponds to the holiness of the mikveh, from which it splits to become 4 heads, Genesis 2:10, which corresponds to the 4 tzitzit, through which faith is channeled, which is as said. This is because the holy conjugal relations correspond to tzitzit, as in, spread your corners over your maidservant, Ruth 3:9, as stated at the end of that lesson. That is why the woman must first immerse in a mikveh, for that is where the light of the tzitzit come through, as in, a river emerges from Eden, to become 4 heads, for through that comes the wholeness of faith, as said. Section 17. This is what our sages said, a day of rain is as great as the day of the resurrection of the dead, Ta'anit 7a, which is why they instituted the prayer for rain in the blessing over the resurrection of the dead. This is because rain corresponds to the channeling of faith that comes through the waters of intelligence that will be manifested in the future, which corresponds to the resurrection of the dead. For then, after the resurrection, will the holy intelligence be manifested, as in, the earth will be filled with knowledge. That will be the time of authentic life, for life comes through the knowledge of God that we will come to know through truth and faith that will be made complete in the future, which is the ultimate essence of life. Section 18. For this reason, the mikveh must be specifically in the earth and not in some vessel. Yoreh Day'ah 201 for the earth corresponds to faith, as in, dwell in the earth and nurture faith. This corresponds to the great benefit of being buried in the land of Israel. The land of Israel corresponds to faith, as stated in the lesson, and specifically, there can the body be sorted out and refined from the filth of the serpent, thereby becoming able to merge into full faith, and then one can attain resurrection. This is because the resurrection is mainly in the land of Israel, as our sages said, Ketubot 111a, that even those who die outside the land of Israel must come through tunnels to reach the land of Israel, which corresponds to faith, in which the ultimate sorting out and refinement take place. Then one attains resurrection, when the sorting out will be completed, and one will attain truth and faith with utmost wholeness, which is the essence of eternal life. Law 5. Do not round the corner of your heads, and do not destroy the corner of your beards. Leviticus 19:27, based upon the lesson in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 21. Study there. In sum, there are transcendent intelligences and internalized intelligences, meaning that the intelligence that a human being is able to attain and which enters into their intelligence corresponds to internalized intelligence, since the intelligence has entered the inside of their mind, whereas the intelligence that does not enter the inside of the mind, on account of the enormous size of this intelligence, but remains revolving and surrounding the mind, corresponds to transcendent intelligence. Now the internalized intelligence is nourished from the transcendent intelligence, and all the questions and conundrums of the philosophers come from the transcendent intelligence, on account of which they are utterly impossible to answer, since they come from the transcendent intelligence that cannot be brought into internalized intelligence. There are many levels of transcendent intelligences, some of which can be attained, for each individual has their individual internalized and transcendent intelligence, and each individual, according to their level, must endeavor and toil in the service of God until they attain transcendent intelligence and bring it into their minds, such that the transcendent becomes internalized, at which point one then has a higher transcendent intelligence, and so on, from level to level. But there are transcendent intelligences that are impossible to attain in this world, and they are the source of all the above conundrums, as well as the root of free choice. For the crux of free choice is in that which the intelligence of knowledge and choice cannot understood. This corresponds to, in the future, the righteous will sit brachot 17a, which means that they will have no free choice with their crowns, which refers to the transcendent intelligences in their heads, for all the transcendent intelligences will have entered inside, on account of which free choice will no longer be possible. Study all this there well. Attaining the transcendent intelligences is through the holiness of the 7 candles, which are the eyes, the ears, the nostrils, and the mouth. Study there. Section 1. This corresponds to the prohibition of shaving off the side locks and the beard, which are the essence of the holiness of a Jewish man. The hairs of the side locks and beard correspond to the supernal conduits through which knowledge is channeled from the transcendent to the internal, so it is forbidden to shave them off. For the essence of Jewish holiness is in coming to recognize the Creator through the channeling of knowledge that comes through those conduits from the illumination of the transcendent intelligence, which correspond to the hairs of the side locks and beard, which correspond to very exalted intelligence, to the transcendent relative to the human being, as can be understood from the writings of the Ari Pri Etz Chaim 13:8. For the Jewish person was only created for this purpose, to endeavor throughout one's life with toil in the service of God, until one attains the transcendent intelligences that one is capable of attaining, which is the entire purpose of one's life. It is the entire delight of the world of the future, the essence of eternal life that the Jewish people will live in the world of the future, as can be understood from the lesson. All this comes through the holy hairs of the side locks and the beard, which is why Jewish holiness is entirely dependent upon them, for they are the ultimate sign of distinction between the Jewish people and the Gentiles. Section 2. It is explained there in the lesson that attaining these transcendent intelligences requires two things which correspond to, says your God. These are crying out in Torah and prayer, in order to give birth to the intelligence, to reveal and take them out of gestation and concealment to birth and manifestation, and then to bring them inside, to make the transcendent internalized. This is achieved through the holiness of the 7 candles, which are the 7 orifices of the head, the 2 eyes, the 2 ears, the 2 nostrils, and the mouth, which correspond to these 7 candles, guarding the eyes from seeing evil and the other orifices respectively, as stated there. Through that we channel divine bounty, which is the attainment of the transcendent intelligences. That is why the hairs of the side locks and the beard that are adjacent to the 7 orifices of the head are the conduits for the transcendent intelligences. The channeling of the transcendent lights is through the 7 candles, which are the 7 orifices of the head, near which the hairs of the side locks and the beard come forth, through which the transcendent intelligences are channeled. That is, in general. In particular, the side locks and the beard are 2 categories, the 2 rectifications, explained in the lesson through which the transcendent intelligences are attained, which are crying out to give birth to the intelligences and the holiness of the 7 candles to bring the transcendent inside. Study there. This corresponds to these 2 commandments of leaving the hairs of the side locks and the hairs of the beard. Through the side locks, we bring about the first rectification, which is the rectification of crying out to give birth to the intelligences, which corresponds to God, which alludes to raising the voice, as explained there in the lesson on the verse, As I, says your Elohim, paragraph 11. This corresponds to the hairs of the side locks, for Pe'aha is numerically Elohim 86 etz, Haim 13, 11. The hairs of the beard, though, are the main channel of the intelligences, as known from the Kabbalistic writings that the intelligences are channeled mainly through the rectifications of the holy beard. That is because the beard grows mainly around the mouth, which is the culminating and all-inclusive one of the 7 candles. For all intelligence that flows through it emerges and is manifested mainly through the orifice of the mouth, which is the ultimate manifestation of intelligence, as in, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding, Proverbs 2:6. Thus, the beard grows there, for through it is channeled all intelligence that is channeled from transcendent to internalized via the totality of the 7 candles that are comprised in the mouth. This is because the beard embodies the 13 rectifications of the beard, which correspond to the 13 principles upon which the Torah may be interpreted, through which we are able to understand the perceived novel Torah insights. For all novel Torah insights come through the 13 principles upon which the Torah may be interpreted, which correspond to the 13 rectifications of the beard, which is the channel of intelligence from transcendent to internalized in order to attain novel Torah insights. That is why the beard embodies the holiness of the 7 candles through which the transcendent is brought inside, as said. This corresponds to, as the good oil descending upon the beard, Psalms 133. 2 corresponding to the holiness of the 7 candles that shine and burn through the oil, which corresponds to knowledge and intelligence. Section 3. This is why side locks grow even in a baby, whereas the beard does not come out until maturity. As a baby grows through childhood, so does its intelligence grow with it, which is its entire vitality. During this time, the mind emerges and grows from gestation to birth, emerging from gestational intelligence to breastfed intelligence, and the hairs of the side locks then emerge and grow, for they correspond to the birth of the mind from gestation to birth, which is the root of the hairs of the side locks, as said. The beard, though, does not grow until maturity. For internalizing transcendent intelligence is the essence of the fullness of human intelligence, which is not attained until maturity. So, a child's beard does not grow. Section 4. This is why a eunuch lacks a beard, Yeremot 8b. As explained in the lesson, the purpose of the commandment of having children is in order to leave behind a blessing through whom to channel the light of the countenance, which corresponds to the attaining of the transcendent intelligence, which is to know and recognize the Creator, which is the holy knowledge that must be channeled from one generation to the next, from father to son. As written, "Father to sons will make known your truth." Isaiah 38:19. This is because it is impossible to channel this entirely in one generation, as can be understood from what the Rebbe writes there regarding Levirate marriage, that the blemish of one who dies without children is that one has not left behind children who will channel the transcendent intelligence. Study there. That is why a eunuch who does not have children does not have a beard, for he is unable to channel the transcendent intelligences that correspond to the beard, which corresponds to the giving birth to children. Section 5. This corresponds to the nature of a child to cry a lot throughout its childhood. From the day of its birth until the conclusion of its childhood is the time of the birthing of the mind, which must be given birth to and manifested from gestation to birth. As we see empirically how intelligence gradually grows with the child. That is why God made the nature of the child to cry a lot in order to give birth to the intelligences from their hiddenness and extract them from gestation, which requires crying out, as in, "Hear our cries, you who knows hidden things," as stated in the lesson. From this, one should learn a lesson regarding the mind and authentic intelligence, to understand the Holy Torah, and to recognize the Creator for situations when one sees that one's mind and intelligence are concealed, as in gestation. One must then cry out profusely to God, literally as a birthing woman and as a child cries throughout childhood in order to give birth to the intelligences. There are countless levels of mind. The cry of a birthing mother or that of a child is to give birth to the simple intelligence that God instilled into the human mind. But afterward, one must give birth on one's own to the most important intelligence that must be acquired through one's own service, in which is the main gestation, birth, maturity, and transcendent intelligences. So, when the mind is in gestation and concealment, one must cry out profusely in order to give birth to them from their concealment, each individual at their level, in whatever places from which the intelligences are hidden, as in, "Hear our cries, you who knows hidden things." For only God knows where the hidden parts of the mind of each individual are concealed, and it is impossible to manifest them from their hiddenness other than through crying out. Laws of a menstruating woman. Section 6. This corresponds to the prohibition of a menstruating woman. As explained in the lesson, the channeling of the transcendent intelligences through the holiness of the 7 candles corresponds to the 7 days of celebration after a wedding. Study there. This is as said. The essence of the commandment to have children is in order to channel the transcendent intelligences from generation to generation, for which purpose there are the rituals of the chuppah canopy and the intimate seclusion of the bride and groom. That is why we must practice the 7 days of rejoicing after a wedding to parallel the 7 candles through which the transcendent intelligences are channeled. For the ultimate purpose of the wedding and the rituals are in order to channel the transcendent intelligences, which are the ultimate knowledge, as said. This is because conjugal relations correspond to knowledge. As written, Adam knew his wife, Genesis 4:1. Since having children comes from a very exalted place, the minds are aroused on high, all the way up to the root of all souls, from where the birth originates. All this corresponds to the channeling of the transcendent intelligences, which is the channeling of knowledge from on high. until it enters and shines into human intelligence in this world, which is the most important thing, for God desires that we come to recognize and know Him specifically in this material world. For that is His greatness and His delight, as brought elsewhere, Likutey Moharan, Part 2, 7. Thus, the human being's entire test and free choice is dependent upon this lust, for God created each thing and its opposite for the sake of free choice. And the ultimate choice is in knowledge itself, as can be understood from the lesson and as I heard myself from the Rebbe's holy mouth. It is impossible to understand how free choice is embedded within the knowing itself. That is why the entire righteousness and uprightness of the righteous and the upright is through the knowledge that they channel with holiness and purity, with truth and faith, not trespassing the boundaries to enter into questions and conundrums that are impossible to understand, since they know and understand that these conundrums are impossible to understand, since they are in the transcendent intelligence that is utterly impossible to bring into this world. So they draw down authentic knowledge and intelligence that is possible for human intelligence to grasp. Through they are able to recognize God according to their level, with truth and full faith, channeling knowledge from generation to generation, which is the most important thing, as said. But the wicked act like Zimri, yet seek to perceive intelligence as Pinchas Sota, 22b, for they do not sanctify their 7 candles at all, but intentionally look with their eyes at forbidden sights, and seek to understand the conundrums that are impossible to understand, on account of which they become distant from God and reach great denials, such that they cause their many followers to stumble and become trapped in their nets as birds caught in a trap, a well-known tragedy, especially in these generations. That is why the main test is in this lust, for at this time we must arouse intelligence at all levels through which birth is brought about. But at the same time, the evil of the tree of knowledge, of good and evil, which is the source of all passion, of the inclination for evil, is also aroused against this. For all movement of intelligence causes heat, and just as movements of the intelligence in holiness gives birth to the heat of passion and enthusiasm for God, with flames of the flames of God, praying and serving God with great passion and enthusiasm of holiness. Similarly, through the evil of the tree of knowledge of good and evil being aroused, the heat of the realm of evil, which is the source of the heat of this lust, is aroused, for the shell precedes the fruit. For this reason, most people only sense the heat of the lust that comes from the sin of Adam, who blemished in the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is why, indeed, that is the point of the main battle, test and refinement. Sichot Haran 115, for free choice, is embedded in the knowing itself, which is the source of conjugal relations, as said. This corresponds to the prohibition of a menstruating woman. Menstrual blood comes from the evil of the tree of knowledge, when Eve was cursed with sadness will you give birth to children, Genesis 3:16, which corresponds to menstrual blood, as our sages said, Eruvin 100b. That is why conjugal relations is completely forbidden during this period of the month, for it is then utterly impossible to channel birth from holy intelligence. This corresponds to 7 days shall she remain in her menstrual state, Leviticus 15:19, paralleling the 7 candles that correspond to the 7 days of celebration after a wedding, through which the holiness of birth is channeled, as said. That is why she must wait 7 days, as in, she shall be secluded for 7 days, after which she is purified specifically by immersing in a mikveh of water, since through immersion in water, purity comes upon her from the 7 shouts that David cried out over the water, which correspond to the crying out spoken of earlier, which corresponds to the crying out of a birthing woman through which intelligence is given birth to, as explained in the lesson. Section 7. This corresponds to, these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt, Exodus 1:1. The essence of all exiles, especially the exile in Egypt, was on account of Adam's blemishing in knowledge, as explained at the end of the lesson. That is why the Egyptians decreed to cast specifically the sons into the water, after which the Israelites cried out to God, which corresponds to the crying out of a birthing woman, through which the intelligences were given birth to. And Moses, who corresponds to knowledge, was manifested and came from Midian to redeem them. The Egyptians were trying to conceal the intelligences, so they decreed against the sons, through whom intelligence is channeled from one generation to the next, for which purpose we must leave behind children in the world, most importantly, males, who correspond to settled knowledge. Likutey Halakhot, Part 1. 30. For it is mainly through the males that intelligence is channeled. That is why the Egyptians schemed to kill them and cast them into the water, for the hidden places of intelligence are in the water, since it is from the water that we bring out the intelligence through crying out, which corresponds to the 7 shouts that David cried out over the water, because water correspond to intelligence. As written, the earth will be filled with knowledge, as the waters. Isaiah 11:9. The Egyptians sought the very opposite to conceal intelligence by casting the sons into the water so that they would die there and intelligence would be hidden. But the Israelite did what they had to do and took up their ancestors' craft, as in, the Israelites cried out to God, Exodus 14:10. For that is the ultimate rectification of the exile and of all troubles, all of which are caused by a lack of intelligence when it has become concealed, as stated at the end of the lesson, which requires crying out. This corresponds to this lengthy, final, and bitter exile, which is entirely caused by the lack of intelligence, by the concealment of the holy mind. That is why God sends all types of troubles to the collective and to each and every individual, all so that one will cry out to God, through which one gives birth to intelligence from its concealment, each individual for their level, through which the redemption, which is called birth, will come about, as in, Zion has entered birth pangs and has given birth to her children, Isaiah 66:8. But meanwhile, at the end of the exile, children have reached the birth channel, but there is no strength to give birth there, 37:3, which requires that each individual will cry out to the extent that one is aware of one's lack of knowledge, of one's distance from God and from His Torah. All the cries that the Jewish people cry out represent the cries of the Shekhinah, through which we give birth to the intelligences, as stated in the lesson, upon which the redemption is dependent, as said. The first redemption from Egypt, as well as the final redemption for which we hope and wait every day, and all redemptions come essentially through Moses, who embodies intelligence. For what was will be Tikkuni Zohar 18, page 36b, who corresponds to the tzaddik of each generation, who corresponds to Moses, through whom intelligence is channeled in every single generation. However, on account of the degeneration of the generations, the intelligences are hidden, on account of which the intelligence of the authentic tzaddik is hidden and concealed in many concealments within concealments. The intelligence may be right before our eyes, but nevertheless, we do not see it on account of the profuse concealments, but mainly on account of the enormous dispute and accusations between the Torah scholars themselves. This very contagious plague of profuse dispute is so prevalent in every generation, especially nowadays, at these end of days when the concealment within concealment is so very intense, as in, I will conceal. Deuteronomy 31:18, which speaks about these end of days. All the questions and conundrums that every individual has regarding the authentic tzaddikim and the upright of the generation are all caused by the hiddenness of the mind and the transcendent intelligence that one is unable to perceive. But that is the essence of one's free choice, since free choice is only because we do not immediately understand the questions and conundrums, for there are questions and conundrums that are impossible to understand throughout one's life. For instance, foreknowledge and free choice, if a human being would understand how they can be reconciled, one would no longer be human by definition, and one would no longer have free choice. But even those questions that a human being can understand which are the transcendent intelligences that one is able to draw into internalized intelligence, are not so easy to perceive and understand. And great toil in the service of God is required, mainly in the two ways discussed above, which are crying out profusely to God, both in Torah and in prayer, and sanctifying the 7 candles. But each individual, to the extent of their distance from this, especially from the holiness of the 7 candles, as each individual knows in themselves, to that extent is one distant from authentic intelligence, which is why many questions and conundrums rise to one's mind against the authentic tzaddik and his followers, who are the embodiment of intelligence. One's entire free choice is dependent upon this, and whoever truly seeks the truth will cry out profusely to God, searching one's deeds, especially regarding what extent one has attained the holiness of the 7 candles, and then one will understand the authentic truth. But at the least one will henceforth surely be spared from opposing and disputing the authentic truth, for one will understand one's failings, how distant one is from authentic intelligence, on account of one's not having properly sanctified the 7 candles, which are the eyes, and so forth. Section 8. This corresponds to the weeks of Shovayim acronym of the weekly readings of Shmot, Va'ira, Bo, Beshalach, Yitro, Mishpatim, during which the upright are accustomed to fast and cry out to God with prayers and petitions for forgiveness. During this period, the weekly Torah reading relates to the exodus from Egypt and the Israelites' redemption that came through crying out, which is what we must do in this exile as well. This is, return Shuvavim, wayward children, Jeremiah 3:14. The ultimate cause of all troubles and exiles is the lack of intelligence, which corresponds to Shuvavim, wayward, in that everyone goes around in the world, literally, like a wayward madman. As written, he went waywardly in the way of his heart, Isaiah 57:17. So when one understands all this in oneself, how one is literally wayward and crazy, for one is following the foolishness of one's heart and not paying any attention to one's eternal goal, one will certainly have mercy on oneself and will cry out profusely to God, through which one will give birth to mind and intelligence appropriate for their level, through which the redemption will come about collectively and individually for every person and at all times. Section 9. In sum, the ultimate cause of all exiles and troubles in body and soul is only a lack of intelligence, which is because one has not sanctified the 7 candles properly and has not cried out to God properly, on account of which the mind and the intelligence have become hidden. That is the root of all distancing from God and from the authentic tzaddikim, which is the essence of all exiles and troubles, which are mainly on account of a lack of intelligence. All human free choice is dependent upon this, for the essence of every individual's free choice is because one does not immediately understand how to answer all questions, conundrums, and distortions of the heart that one has against the authentic tzaddikim and their followers. If one were to immediately understand and see with one's intelligence their enormous truth and great statures and righteousness, and how one would be able to attain authentic and eternal good through them, one would certainly run as fast as one could to come close to them and roll in the dust at their feet. However, the truth is so very hidden and concealed, and there are so many opposers and antagonists who say what they say, poisoning the minds of all those who desire to come close with many questions, conundrums, and confusions. All free choice is dependent on this, for free choice is made possible only because we do not immediately understand how to answer the questions, since the answers for the questions are in the intelligence that is transcendent for one's level. As stated in the lesson regarding the riddles of foreknowledge and free choice, which are in the transcendent intelligence, all free choice is specifically because we do not understand the intelligence that reconciles foreknowledge and free choice. But the same is true for all questions and conundrums that every individual has. For the essence of free choice is in not understanding the intelligence that answers all the questions that one has against the authentic tzaddikim and upright. And the truth is, if all true intelligence would be completely concealed without any manifestation at all, it would certainly be completely impossible to come close to God and to His authentic tzaddikim. But God is compassionate, filled with compassion and merciful on His people in every single generation, sending and enlightening us with an amazing manifestation of intelligence through amazing and awesome novel Torah teachings that the authentic tzaddikim bring into the world in every generation. This allows for free choice, so that whoever does not want to fool themselves, but looks with an eye of authentic truth, will be able to see through this, where the authentic point of truth lies, and to whom one should come close. And if there are still questions that disturb the individual, one understands that this is inevitable, for obviously it is impossible to understand and perceive an intelligence that is so beyond oneself, which is the intelligence of the authentic tzaddik. For just as it is impossible to perceive God's intelligence, on account of which one will inevitably have many questions about God, which is indeed inevitable, Likutey Moharan, Part 2, 52. Similarly, it is inevitable that there will be questions about the authentic tzaddik, for it is impossible to perceive intelligence that is higher than one's own. However, at least since a ray of the authentic intelligence of the authentic tzaddikim has already shined into one's intelligence through the light of their Torah teachings that they have brought into the world, through that it behooves one to pursue the authentic tzaddikim and their followers with all of one's might. For now, one has free choice by having seen a vision of a dawning of the wonders of their intelligence and truth. This counters the questions and conundrums of the opposers that one has heard, the denials and distortions that they have introduced into one's mind. One's entire free choice is at this junction. Let each individual choose. Understand this well. One must search in one's own deeds, where one is holding in the sanctification of the 7 candles, through which one will understand one's distance from the perception of authentic intelligence, upon which one's entire free choice is dependent. Section 10. This is why Moses repeatedly refused to go on God's mission to take the Israelites out of Egypt, arguing many arguments, such as, "When they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I tell them?" Exodus 3:13, and "They will not believe me," there, 4:1, and others, until eventually saying, "Please send someone else there," verse 13. Moses knew how difficult it would be to imbue the Israelites with intelligence, since they had not yet properly sanctified themselves. The Israelites at that time were not deserving of being redeemed, as written, "You were not washed in water. I passed over you, and I saw you wallowing in your blood." Ezekiel 16. So it would be very difficult to imbue them with authentic intelligence, upon which their entire redemption was dependent. But God compelled Moses to go and shine into them intelligence and to take them out. God had compassion on them in merit of the forefathers, bypassing the set time, as written, "My beloved's voice has come, jumping over the mountains, skipping over the hills." Song of Songs 2:8, Perki de Rabbi Eliezer 48. For God saw that if He would not shine any intelligence into them, there was no way they would attain redemption. He saw that it was impossible to delay their redemption until they would appropriately sanctify the 7 candles, such that they would be deserving to perceive the transcendent intelligences through their holiness. For the forces of evil were very great, and over time they would completely sink into exile, into the filth of Egypt, and had they remained in Egypt any extra moment, they would have remained submerged there forever. Halachic, Exodus 12. That is the secret of "they could not tarry," Exodus 12:39. So God had mercy on them and bypassed the set end, shining into them an illumination of intelligence through Moses, an amazing illumination, even though they did not deserve it by their deeds. Through that they were aroused to return to God, as in, "Draw me after you, and we will run." Song of Songs 1:4, as Rashi explains there. But they still had a huge choice to make. They still had many questions and conundrums, since they had still not properly perceived the transcendent intelligences, because they did not deserve them, since they had still not sanctified the 7 candles. Even the illumination and ray of intelligence that did perceive was also only by way of God's grace and compassion, beyond what was rightfully appropriate. This was the cause of all the many times that they tested God, questioning him and Moses, all on account of the above, since they had not fully attained the transcendent intelligences because they had not properly sanctified themselves. So what did help the Israelites, since most of them in fact remained firm, was the merit of their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as well as their own crying out to God, as written, "I will fulfill my covenant with, and I have heard the groans of the Israelites." Exodus 6:4. For the birthing of the minds from their hiddenness is mainly through crying out, as said. Every individual at all times must know this, for all of this happens to every single individual. From this, the intelligent one who desires the authentic truth will understand strategies and encouragement to come close to the point of truth. So that when one sees that many questions and confusions have risen to one's mind, one must cry out to God, for by crying out, one gives birth to the intelligences from their concealment. Section 11. This corresponds to the beginning of the manifestation to Moses, which took place through the vision in the bush. A bush was ablaze in fire, but the bush was not being consumed. Exodus 3:2, where Rashi comments that God appeared to Moses in a bush to show that he was with the Israelites in their time of distress. The bush corresponds to the thorns and thistles that surround the supernal rose, which correspond to the questions and conundrums that the deniers present against God and against his authentic followers, which is the main cause of the extension of the exile. So God appeared to Moses in the bush, and Moses saw a bush that was ablaze in fire, but the bush was not being consumed, meaning that the holy fire, which is the manifestation of the knowledge of the Torah, which corresponds to flames of fire, Song of Songs 3:2, as in, "Indeed, my word is like fire," Jeremiah 23:29, is constantly busy burning and consuming the bush and all the thorns and thistles, meaning eradicating all denials, questions, and conundrums. Nevertheless, the bush is not being consumed, for questions, conundrums, and distortions of the heart remain, which is what greatly perplexed Moses, who said, "Let me go over and see the great vision, why the bush is not burning." God responded by saying, "Remove your shoes from your feet." There are countless many levels regarding the perceiving of the transcendent intelligences, for they are the entire reward of the world of the future of each individual, appropriate for their level and service. Perceiving these intelligences corresponds to the world of the future of the tzaddikim, who will sit with their crowns in their heads, as stated in the lesson, that this corresponds to. Each tzaddik will be burnt by their fellow's canopy, Bava Batra 75a. Study there. All the questions and conundrums in the world come from these transcendent intelligences that one has not been able to perceive. And even one who does perceive, some of them will still have others that one has not yet perceived, which is the source of the questions and conundrums that sum to one's mind, and so on, higher upon higher. Ultimately, there are intelligences that are so exalted and sublime that even a very great tzaddik with great holiness is still required to sanctify himself more and more before he will be able to perceive those too. This is what God said to Moses, "Remove your shoes from your feet," which alludes that he should remove from himself the body that had been touched by Pharaoh's daughter Tikkuni Zohar 21, page 48b. In other words, even Moses is unable to incinerate the bush and the thorns, which are all the conundrums, until he removes his body from himself, even though his body was certainly already very holy with amazing holiness. Yet nevertheless, since Pharaoh's daughter still had some hold over his body, he must now utterly strip himself of it completely, so that he will be able to perceive such exalted intelligences. All the more is this so for the rest of the Israelites, who had not yet appropriately sanctified themselves at all, so they can certainly not attain any full perception of the transcendent intelligences, for which reason they are beset by questions and confusions that correspond to the bush, the thorns, and the thistles. That is why the bush was burning in the fire of the Torah, an intelligence that the tzaddikim reveal, yet the bush was not being consumed, and the thorns were poking and pricking the intelligence and heart of the Israelites with questions and conundrums, which correspond to bush, thorns, and thistles, all because they had not begun to strip themselves of their bodies and properly sanctify the 7 candles.